Hey there, welcome to Broaderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. The Curse of the Old Castle. Have you ever felt the weight of history pressing down on you, as if the very walls of a place could whisper the secrets of the past? It was a question that danced in my mind as I stood at the entrance of the old castle. My friends, eager and oblivious to the chill that crawled up my spine, chattered excitedly beside me, unaware of the shadows that lingered in the corners of my thoughts. I was not one for ghost stories. Yet, the local legends surrounding this castle were unsettling. They spoke of a curse that had befallen anyone who dared to trespass beyond its gates. Tales of flickering lights in the tower at night, strange sounds echoing through the empty halls, and shadows that moved of their own accord had reached us. Despite this, when my friends suggested we explore the castle on a whim, I felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Perhaps it was the allure of the unknown that drew me in, or maybe it was the thrill of facing my fears. As we stepped inside, the air grew heavy and still, like the calm before a storm. The grand entrance hall loomed before us, its dusty wooden floor creaking under our weight. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, shimmering in the dim light that filtered through the cracked windows. My heart raced, not just from the excitement, but from the eerie stillness that enveloped us. "Come on, let's check out the main hall," shouted Tom, his voice echoing against the stone walls. I hesitated, casting a cautious glance at the shadows that clung to the edges of the room. Something about the atmosphere felt wrong, like a warning bell tolling in the back of my mind. Yet, the others were already moving ahead, their laughter reverberating through the hall, urging me to follow. As I walked further into the castle, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I glanced back, half expecting to see someone behind us, but only the empty corridor stared back. "It's just an old place," I told myself. "Get a grip." Yet, my instincts whispered that there was more to this castle than mere decay and silence. The walls were adorned with faded portraits, their eyes seeming to follow us as we moved. Each face held a story, a fragment of the past trapped within the paint, and I felt a shiver of unease. It was as if the castle itself was alive, its memories clawing at the edges of my mind. In the far corner of the hall, a massive mirror caught my eye. It was intricately carved, its surface dusty but oddly reflective. I approached it, drawn in by an inexplicable compulsion. As I stared into the glass, I expected to see my reflection, but instead, I felt an unsettling pull, as though the mirror was revealing something hidden beneath the surface. I blinked, and for a fleeting moment, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing behind me, a dark silhouette that vanished when I turned to look. "Hey, are you coming or what?" Jenna called out, breaking the spell. I tore my gaze from the mirror, shaking off the unease that had settled like a fog in my mind. The others were already heading towards a narrow staircase, excitement evident in their voices. Despite my hesitation, I followed them up the stairs, the wooden steps groaning beneath our weight. The air grew cooler, and an unsettling draft whispered through the corridor. With each step, the stories I had heard began to resurface, intertwining with my thoughts. This place felt more than just old, it felt haunted, steeped in sorrow and regret. As we reached the upper floor, I couldn't shake the feeling of being drawn deeper into something I couldn't comprehend. It was like stepping into a dream that teetered on the edge of nightmare. What awaited us in the heart of the castle? Would we emerge unscathed, or would we become just another chapter in its haunted history? In that moment, I sensed that the castle was watching, waiting for us to uncover its darkest secrets. Little did I know, the real horrors were yet to come. The staircase opened into a dimly lit corridor, the air thick with dust and the scent of damp stone. A flickering candle stood precariously on a rickety table, casting dancing shadows that stretched across the walls. My heart pounded as we stepped inside, the light revealing more of the castle's secrets. Each room we passed was shrouded in darkness, the doors slightly ajar as if inviting us to uncover what lay within. "Let's check this one out," Tom suggested, pushing open the door to our left. The creaking hinges echoed ominously, and the moment I stepped inside, a cold wave washed over me, sending chills down my spine. The room was adorned with tattered drapes that hung like ghosts from the windows, and the furniture was draped in dusty white sheets, as if the occupants had only just left. As my friends laughed and began to explore, I moved to the far side of the room where an old wardrobe loomed against the wall. It looked ancient, the wood darkened by time and neglect. I reached out to touch it, and a jolt of energy surged through me, a whisper of something long forgotten. It felt as if the wardrobe were alive, breathing secrets of the past. "Look what I found!" Jenna exclaimed from across the room, breaking my concentration. She held up an old book, its leather cover cracked and worn. "It's a diary!" The group gathered around her as she opened it, the pages yellowed and fragile. The handwriting was elegant yet frantic, a stark contrast to the eerie silence of the room. "Listen to this," she read aloud. "The shadows come alive at night, and the walls remember the cries of those who have been lost within. Beware the hour when the sun sets, for it is then that the curse awakens." A chill raced down my spine. "What does that even mean?" I asked, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. Tom shrugged, clearly fascinated. "Probably just a story to scare off intruders." But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was truth hidden beneath the surface. As Jenna continued to read, I wandered back to the wardrobe, my curiosity piqued. What if the diary held answers? What if it was a warning? I pulled open the doors, the wood creaking in protest, and peered inside. It was empty, save for a single dusty coat that hung limply. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the castle, making me jump. My friends looked at each other, eyes wide with alarm. "What was that?" whispered Jenna, her voice trembling. "Probably just the wind," Tom said, but I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. We all knew that the air was still. There was no breeze to stir the heavy silence. The sense of isolation settled deeper, thickening the atmosphere around us. "Let's check it out," I suggested, my voice barely above a whisper. It felt like an invitation to disaster, but curiosity urged me forward. We moved cautiously through the corridor, every footstep echoing ominously, the anticipation gnawing at our insides. As we approached the source of the sound, a heavy door at the end of the hall, I felt an inexplicable urge to turn back. The sense of being watched intensified, as if the very walls were closing in on us. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning us closer. My breath caught in my throat, and I exchanged glances with my friends. "Should we?" Jenna asked, her voice trembling. "Yeah, we need to see what's going on," Tom insisted, pushing the door open wider. Inside, the room was engulfed in darkness, the air thick with an unsettling energy. I felt a tug of fear, a voice in my mind screaming for us to leave. But before I could voice my concerns, Tom stepped inside, followed closely by the others. As I crossed the threshold, the door creaked ominously behind me, slamming shut with a resounding thud. A cold sweat broke out on my brow as the darkness swallowed us whole. Panic surged in my chest. I could hardly see my friends, their silhouettes blurred in the gloom. "Tom?" I called out, my voice echoing unnaturally. "Where are you?" A flicker of light caught my eye. Tom had found a candle on a nearby table and lit it. The dim flame flickered to life, revealing the room's contents. It was a study filled with books and artifacts that hinted at a long-abandoned life. The walls were lined with shelves, their contents covered in dust. "Check this out," Tom exclaimed, pointing to a large, ornate mirror that stood against the wall, its surface clouded and grimy. "It's like the one downstairs." As I approached the mirror, a sense of déjà vu washed over me. I hesitated, staring into the glass. This time, I wasn't just looking at my reflection. I could see shadows moving behind me, dark and fleeting, as if the past was trying to break free. My heart raced, and I instinctively stepped back. "What's wrong?" Jenna asked, concern etching her features. I don't know," I stammered. "It's just, something feels off." Just as I turned to leave, the candle flickered violently, casting erratic shadows across the room. The mirror reflected a brief glimpse of something, a face, twisted in anguish, eyes hollow and pleading. My breath hitched, and I stumbled back, colliding with Tom. "What the hell was that?" he shouted, his voice filled with panic. Before I could respond, a loud bang resonated from the direction we had come, followed by a low, guttural sound that sent chills down my spine. The room felt alive, vibrating with a malevolent energy that wrapped around us like a vice. "Run!" I screamed, instinctively pulling Jenna's arm as I dashed towards the door. We had to escape this cursed place before it consumed us too. But as we reached for the handle, it wouldn't budge. Panic set in, the realization crashing over us like a wave. We were trapped. Panic clawed at my throat as I yanked the door handle again, my heart racing. "It's locked," I shouted, desperation lacing my voice. The low growl from behind us echoed in the darkness, reverberating off the walls like a sinister lullaby. Tom pounded on the door, his fists colliding with the wood, but it wouldn't budge. "We have to get out. Now!" His voice was edged with fear, and I could see that my friends were beginning to panic. Jenna stood frozen, her eyes wide, as if she were trapped in a nightmare. "We need to find another way," I urged, glancing around the room. My gaze landed on the window, its old glass grimy and clouded. "What about the window?" Tom turned, his brow furrowing. "It's too high. We can't reach it." But as I glanced up, I noticed a small bookshelf pushed against the wall, its top barely grazing the ceiling. "We can climb on the shelves," I suggested, my voice rising with hope. "Let's go." Without waiting for a reply, I dashed to the bookshelf and began to scale it, using the dusty spines of old tomes as my footholds. My heart raced, and I could feel the shadows swirling around me, pressing in like a living entity. "Hurry!" I urged, glancing down to see if my friends were following. Jenna climbed up behind me, her face pale but determined. Tom, however, hesitated. "What if we fall?" "There's no time for that. We need to get out," I called down, my frustration bubbling to the surface. With a quick glance back at the door, I pushed myself up higher, reaching for the window's latch. At last, I grasped it, the metal cold against my fingers. I tugged, my heart pounding in my chest. The window creaked open, a rush of cool air flooding the room. I could hear the growling sound intensify, almost as if it were angry at our attempt to escape. "Quick, get up here," I urged Jenna, who was nearly at my side. She scrambled up the shelves, and together we clambered onto the windowsill. "Tom, come on," I shouted, but he was still rooted to the spot, his expression torn. "You go. I'll find another way." "No," I cried, fear bubbling up inside me. "You'll be trapped." But before he could answer, the door slammed open with a deafening crash. The air turned icy, and I felt the shadows coiling around us. From the darkness, a figure emerged, a grotesque silhouette with hollow eyes and a mouth stretched into a chilling grin. "Get out!" I screamed, shoving Jenna through the window just as Tom finally made a desperate leap toward us. I caught his hand, pulling him up just in time as the figure lunged forward. We stumbled backward, falling out of the window into the thick grass below, just as the specter's cold fingers grazed my ankle. Gasping for breath, we rolled away from the castle, the moonlight illuminating our path as we scrambled to our feet. I looked back, the silhouette standing at the window, its form flickering in the dim light, as if the very essence of the castle was trying to drag us back inside. "Run!" I yelled, leading the way away from the castle, our hearts racing in unison as we dashed through the overgrown garden, past the twisted trees that seemed to reach out with skeletal fingers. We didn't stop until we reached the edge of the forest, the castle looming ominously in the distance. Its dark towers pierced the night sky, and the chill that had settled over us remained, seeping into our bones. "We made it," Jenna panted, collapsing to the ground. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. "What was that thing?" Tom breathed, looking back toward the castle, as if expecting the shadows to follow us. "I don't know," I replied, my voice trembling. But it felt real, like it was feeding off our fear. "We can't just leave," Jenna said, her voice shaky but resolute. "We need to find out what's going on. That diary, it might have more answers." I hesitated, the weight of her words settling in my chest. Part of me wanted to run far away from this place, to forget the horrors we had just witnessed. But another part of me felt a pull, an undeniable curiosity to uncover the truth. "Fine," I said, my voice low. "But we need to be careful. If that thing is real, then we're not safe yet." We made our way back to the castle, every shadow feeling alive, every rustle of leaves sending shivers down my spine. The closer we got, the more the dread hung over us like a shroud. As we approached the entrance, the door swung open with a chilling creak. It was an invitation or a warning. "Should we?" Tom asked, glancing back at me, uncertainty etched on his face. I nodded, swallowing hard. "We have to know." The moment we stepped inside, the temperature dropped sharply, the air thick with foreboding. The castle had swallowed us again, and this time, the darkness felt even more oppressive. As we made our way back to the study, I felt the shadows swirling around us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the castle was alive, waiting for us to uncover its darkest secrets. We pushed open the door to the study, and I felt a sense of déjà vu wash over me. The flickering candle was still burning, casting its feeble light across the room. But something was different, something felt off. In the mirror, I caught a glimpse of something moving behind me again. My heart raced, and I turned, but nothing was there. "Did you see that?" I gasped, my breath coming in short bursts. "See what?" Jenna asked, her brow furrowing in confusion. "There's something in the mirror," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Let's focus on the diary," Tom suggested, trying to break the tension. But as we gathered around the old book, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. The shadows grew thicker, and the whispers of the past beckoned, urging us to uncover the truth buried within the castle's walls. As we huddled around the diary, I felt the oppressive weight of the castle pressing down on us, almost as if it were holding its breath, waiting for us to unlock its secrets. The flickering candlelight danced ominously across the pages, casting strange shadows that writhed and twisted like living things. "Okay, let's see what else it says," Jenna said, her voice steady despite the fear that lingered in her eyes. She began to read again, the words spilling forth like a dark revelation. "It speaks of a family cursed by greed and betrayal," she read aloud, her brow furrowing. "A father who turned against his own children, sealing their fate within these walls. They say their souls roam the castle, seeking vengeance on anyone who dares to disturb their eternal slumber." I could feel the air grow heavier with each word, a palpable tension building around us. "What if that figure we saw is one of them?" I whispered, the thought sending chills racing down my spine. "Maybe they're trapped here, just like us," Tom replied, his eyes darting to the mirror, which seemed to pulse with an otherworldly light. "Let's not jump to conclusions," Jenna interjected, her voice firm. "We need to find a way to break the curse. There must be something in the diary that tells us how." She continued reading, her voice trembling slightly. "To break the bond, one must confront the shadows of the past. Only then can the souls find peace." "What does that mean?" I asked, glancing at Tom and Jenna, my heart racing. "How do we confront shadows?" Suddenly, the room grew cold, the temperature dropping sharply. I could see my breath fogging in front of me. I felt the shadows creeping closer, the whispers growing louder, echoing through the castle as if the very walls were trying to warn us. "Maybe it means we need to face whatever that thing was," Tom suggested, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can't let it keep haunting us." I nodded, a mix of fear and determination coursing through me. "But how?" "We have to lure it out somehow." Jenna closed the diary, her expression resolute. "We can't just sit here waiting. We need to confront it. If the legends are true, it may be the only way to end this." As we deliberated, I caught sight of the mirror again. The glass shimmered, the surface rippling like water disturbed by a stone. I stepped closer, drawn in by an unseen force. I think it wants us to look," I murmured, my voice barely audible. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Tom replied, glancing nervously at the door. "We've come this far," I insisted, feeling a strange compulsion to peer deeper into the glass. "We have to understand." With that, I placed my hand on the cold surface of the mirror. The moment I did, a jolt of energy surged through me, and the room spun around us. Images began to flash across the surface, a chaotic montage of shadowy figures and scenes from the past. I gasped as I saw the family, the father standing tall, a twisted smile on his face, while the children cowered in fear. The shadows shifted, swirling around them, and I could hear their anguished cries resonating in my ears. "They're trapped!" Jenna screamed, her hands gripping my shoulders. "They can't escape." But the more I looked, the more I realized that the shadows weren't just victims, they were vengeful spirits, longing to escape the prison of their own making. They reached out from the mirror, their ghostly hands brushing against the surface, and I could feel their pain, their anger. "Help us," a voice cried out, echoing in my mind. It was a plea and a threat all at once. "No! We can't help them!" I shouted, pulling back as the shadows surged forward, threatening to pull me into the depths of the mirror. "Focus!" Tom shouted, his voice breaking through the chaos. We need to break the connection. I took a deep breath, fighting against the fear that threatened to swallow me whole. We need to confront the Father, I realized, a chilling certainty settling over me. He's the source of the curse. Jenna nodded, her eyes fierce. But how do we do that? We don't even know where he is. The diary might have more clues, I replied, tearing my gaze away from the mirror. Let's find out what else we need to do. As we rifled through the pages, the air crackled with tension. The shadows seemed to grow restless, swirling around us like a dark storm. Here, Jenna exclaimed, pointing to a passage. It says we need to speak the truth that binds the curse. Only then can the shadows be released. What truth? I asked, my heart racing. Something that ties us to the past, Jenna replied, her eyes widening. Something that links us to the family. Suddenly, the door slammed shut again, the sound reverberating through the room. The shadows began to coalesce, forming the shape of the Father, a dark figure with eyes like hollow voids. You dared to disturb my domain, his voice boomed, shaking the very foundations of the castle. Stay back. I yelled, stepping forward, my heart pounding. We're here to confront you. You've trapped these souls for too long. Foolish children, he sneered, the darkness swirling around him like a cloak. You know nothing of sacrifice or consequence. We know enough. Tom shouted, his voice strong. You hurt your own family. We're here to make it right. The figure laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the hall. You think you can undo what has been done? The curse is eternal. Maybe, but we're not afraid of you. Jenna yelled, stepping beside me. We know the truth of your betrayal. The shadows writhed in fury, the room shaking as the figure's anger intensified. You dare speak of betrayal? You are the ones who intrude upon my sanctuary. We are the ones who will end this. I cried, my voice stronger now, resonating with the truth we had uncovered. You can't keep them here forever. They deserve peace. The figure recoiled, the shadows swirling violently around him. Peace, he hissed, the darkness convulsing. They have forsaken me. No, they didn't, I countered, my heart racing. You forsook them. You turned against your own blood. The only way to break this curse is to acknowledge what you've done. With those words, the shadows surged forward, enveloping the figure in a whirlwind of darkness. He screamed, a sound that pierced through the very fabric of the castle. Help me, he bellowed, his voice breaking as the shadows wrapped around him. Do not leave me. But in that moment, I realized that he had been the architect of his own fate. It's too late for you, I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. You must face the truth of your actions. As the shadows swallowed him whole, I felt a rush of energy course through the room. The air grew lighter, the oppressive weight lifting as the spirits of the children emerged, their forms flickering in the dim candlelight. Thank you, they whispered in unison, their voices like a gentle breeze. We are free. The room brightened, the shadows receding as the spirits floated toward the mirror, their expressions peaceful at last. As they passed through the glass, the oppressive energy dissipated, leaving only the flickering candlelight behind. But just as the last shadow faded, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, a reminder of the darkness we had faced. I staggered backward, clutching my heart, as Tom and Jenna rushed to my side. Are you okay? Jenna asked, panic etched on her face. I think so, I replied, my voice shaky. but we need to get out of here. It's not over yet. As we turned to leave, the castle began to tremble, the walls shaking violently as if protesting our departure. "Run!" I shouted, leading the way toward the door. We burst through the entrance, the moonlight flooding over us as we stumbled into the open air. Behind us, the castle groaned, its ancient stones shifting as the curse was finally lifted. As we made our way back to the safety of the woods, I glanced back one last time. The castle stood there, a shadow of its former self, the darkness that had once consumed it now lifted. But deep down, I knew that the echoes of its past would linger, a reminder of the darkness we had faced and the truth we had uncovered. "I can't believe we made it," Jenna said, her voice breathless with disbelief. "Yeah, but we'll never be the same," I replied, a mixture of relief and sorrow settling over me. The night was quiet now, but I could still feel the lingering presence of the castle, a haunting melody that would forever be etched in my mind. We had confronted our fears, faced the shadows of the past, and emerged into the light, but the scars of our journey would remain, a testament to the power of truth and the enduring strength of the human spirit. And as we walked away, I realized that sometimes the darkest curses can lead to the most profound revelations. Hunting for the monster. Have you ever felt the weight of silence pressing down on you, a silence so profound it gnaws at your insides? I stood at the edge of the forest, a sprawling mass of ancient trees that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. My name is Jacob, and for years, I had been drawn to the thrill of the hunt, hunts that were mostly driven by the thrill of the chase and the camaraderie of my friends. But this time, it was different. This time, I was alone. As I ventured deeper into the woods, the sunlight faded, swallowed by the thick canopy above. The shadows danced around me, teasing my senses. I had heard tales of a creature lurking in these woods, an elusive monster said to be born from the nightmares of those who dared to tread here. They called it the Shadow Wraith, a being that thrived on fear and preyed upon the lost and the lonely. I tried to dismiss the stories as mere folklore, remnants of a time when the world was more superstitious. Yet, the further I walked, the more the atmosphere shifted. The air grew thick with a tension I couldn't shake, as if the forest itself was alive and aware of my presence. The sounds of nature began to fade, replaced by a deep, unsettling quiet. I remembered the warnings of the locals, never wander alone, the woods can deceive you. But I was determined. I had my gear, my trusty compass, and a fierce resolve. I felt invincible, though beneath the bravado lay an undercurrent of unease. Night fell quickly, wrapping the forest in an inky darkness. I set up my camp, the flickering flames casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward me with hungry fingers. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was a sensation that slithered under my skin, prickling the hairs on the back of my neck. As I sat by the fire, my thoughts drifted to the creature. What would it look like? Would it be a monstrous beast or something more insidious? I tried to convince myself it was just a figment of imagination, a story meant to scare children. But deep down, I knew I was chasing something far more than a myth. Suddenly, a rustle in the underbrush broke my reverie. I turned, heart pounding, expecting to see a deer or some other harmless creature. Instead, there was nothing, just the inky blackness of the woods. The fire crackled, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky, but it did little to quell my rising fear. I crawled into my sleeping bag, trying to shake off the chill that seeped into my bones. As I lay there, drifting between consciousness and sleep, I heard it, a low growl, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very shadows surrounding me. I bolted upright, pulse racing, straining to listen. The growl morphed into whispers, echoing in my mind, luring me deeper into the forest. Jacob. Jacob. The voice was soft, almost familiar, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I clutched my flashlight, its beam slicing through the dark, revealing nothing but trees, old, gnarled giants standing sentinel. In that moment, I understood. The hunt had begun, and the monster I sought was not a distant figment of myth. It was here, in the very heart of the forest, waiting for me. The whispers faded as suddenly as they had come, leaving me in an oppressive silence that felt alive. I lay back down, forcing my mind to clear, but sleep eluded me. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves had me on edge, hyper-aware of my surroundings. I cursed myself for my foolishness, for thinking I could conquer the unknown alone. Dawn broke reluctantly, the feeble light filtering through the trees. I packed up my camp with a sense of urgency, the remnants of the night's terror still clinging to me like a shroud. I needed to move, to find a way out or at least deeper into the woods. With each step, the fear tightened its grip on me. The forest seemed to shift and morph, paths I had marked disappearing, swallowed by the relentless undergrowth. I could feel the Shadow Wraith's presence lurking just beyond my sight, a darkness that breathed and pulsed with a sinister intent. The legends had spoken of its ability to manipulate the forest, to ensnare those who dared to challenge it. As I pressed on, I stumbled upon a clearing, a stark contrast to the claustrophobic thicket I had been traversing. In the center stood a massive tree, its trunk twisted and gnarled, with deep grooves that seemed to writhe like snakes. I approached, compelled by an unseen force, my heart hammering in my chest. As I reached out to touch the bark, a sharp pain shot through my fingertips. I pulled back, startled to see crimson droplets welling from the wound. Confusion washed over me, and I glanced around, half expecting the creature to emerge from the shadows. Instead, the clearing was silent, save for the soft rustling of the leaves above. Then I noticed something unusual at the base of the tree, small, intricate carvings, words etched into the wood. I bent closer, straining to decipher the text. The words were warped, twisted by time, but one stood out clearly: fear. My breath quickened as I realized these weren't just carvings, they were warnings, remnants of those who had come before me, all drawn into the forest's grasp. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. A chill raced through the air, and the sunlight dimmed as dark clouds gathered overhead. It felt as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to unfold. Panic surged within me. I turned to leave the clearing, but the path I had taken was gone, obscured by a thick curtain of fog that had rolled in without warning. I felt the weight of despair settling in, a crushing realization that the forest was toying with me. "It's just a trick," I muttered to myself, trying to hold onto my sanity. I turned back to the tree, searching for another way out. That's when I saw it, a figure, barely discernible through the mist, watching me from the shadows. The figure was cloaked, its features hidden beneath a hood. I felt a chill run down my spine, and the whispers returned, more insistent this time. "Jacob, come closer," it beckoned, the voice an eerie melody that tugged at the edges of my mind. Against my better judgment, I took a step forward. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice trembling. The figure remained still, and the fog thickened, curling around my legs like icy tendrils. "Come," it urged, and I could feel the darkness creeping into my thoughts, wrapping around me like a vice. "Find me. You must find me." The fear within me transformed into an inexplicable longing, a need to understand. I stepped closer, my heart racing, caught between the desire to flee and the compulsion to discover the truth. Suddenly, the figure darted away, slipping into the depths of the forest. Without thinking, I pursued it, driven by instinct that felt both foreign and familiar. I raced after the specter, branches whipping at my face, the whispers growing louder, more chaotic. The forest twisted around me, the ground beneath my feet shifting like quicksand. Just as I thought I might lose the figure, I stumbled into another clearing. This one was different, a graveyard of memories. Surrounding me were broken dolls, twisted remnants of childhood dreams, their glassy eyes staring blankly. Each one seemed to pulse with a life of its own, whispering secrets of despair and loss. In the center of the clearing lay a mirror, cracked and dirty. I approached, my reflection barely visible amidst the chaos. But it wasn't my face that looked back, it was a shadow, a dark outline that seemed to morph and shift. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath me, and the mirror shattered with a deafening crack. The pieces flew in all directions, embedding themselves into the earth like thorns. I staggered back, heart pounding, as the whispers morphed into a deafening roar. The trees around me twisted and turned, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands, pulling me into the depths of darkness. In that moment, I realized the truth. The shadow wraith was not just a creature of the night. It was a manifestation of my fears, of every doubt and insecurity I had ever harbored. It was closing in, and I was caught in its web, unable to escape the very shadows I had sought to conquer. I turned to run, but the whispers enveloped me, drowning out my thoughts. I was trapped, ensnared in a nightmare of my own making. I don't know how long I ran, or where I was running to. The trees blurred into a suffocating mass of black and green, their limbs reaching for me, blocking my path. The whispers still haunted my every step, now blending with my ragged breaths, a symphony of dread that made my pulse race. The figure was gone, vanished into the forest, leaving only that terrible compulsion in its wake. I no longer knew why I chased it. Every step felt like I was plunging deeper into madness, but there was no turning back. Something in these woods had awakened, and it was hungry. I came to a stop, gasping for air, my legs burning. The fog was thicker now, swirling in front of me like a living thing. Through the mist, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Eyes. Dozens of eyes, gleaming with a faint, sickly glow, peered at me from the shadows between the trees. They watched, unblinking, as if they had been there all along, waiting for me to notice them. For the first time, I felt truly helpless. "Show yourself," I shouted, but my voice cracked with fear. The eyes shifted, flickering in the dark like dying embers. Then, slowly, one by one, they blinked out, leaving me in total darkness. I backed away, tripping over roots and stones, barely able to see a foot in front of me. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, each beat louder than the last, drowning out the forest's eerie silence. Suddenly, a branch snapped behind me. I spun around, shining my flashlight into the void, but the beam barely penetrated the fog. The growl returned, low and guttural, vibrating through the ground beneath me. It wasn't a distant sound this time, it was close, too close. The air felt thicker, as if the entire forest had come alive, squeezing me from all sides. I could feel it watching me, stalking me. The monster wasn't just a myth. It wasn't a ghost either. It was real, and it was here. "Run," a voice whispered, not from the forest, but from within my own mind. I didn't need to be told twice. Panic flooded my veins, and I sprinted, the flashlight bouncing wildly in my grasp. The growl grew louder, and I could hear the crashing of something large moving through the trees behind me. My lungs burned, my legs screamed for rest, but I pushed on, desperate to escape. I stumbled again, this time falling hard to the ground. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and the flashlight flew from my hands, rolling away into the mist. Darkness swallowed me whole. I scrambled to my feet, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my gear. I couldn't see anything, only hear the rhythmic thud of approaching footsteps, heavier and more deliberate than any animal I'd ever encountered. A cold sweat broke out on my skin. I had no weapons, no plan, just the crushing realization that I was being hunted. Then, through the suffocating darkness, I felt something warm brush against my leg. My breath hitched, and I froze. Slowly, I turned my head, terrified of what I might see. It stood there, towering over me, shrouded in the shadows, but close enough for me to feel its presence, its eyes, gleaming with malevolent intelligence, locked onto mine. The Shadow Wraith. It wasn't the creature from the stories. It wasn't a mindless beast. It was something far worse, something ancient, calculating, and filled with a quiet, unrelenting rage. Its form was hard to define, constantly shifting as though it was made of the shadows themselves. But those eyes, they were real, piercing, filled with a knowledge that made my skin crawl. For a moment, neither of us moved. My mind raced, searching for an escape, but my body refused to obey. I was paralyzed by its gaze, rooted to the spot by an overwhelming sense of dread. Then, slowly, it raised a hand, if you could call it that. The shape was fluid, amorphous, but undeniably threatening. It stretched toward me, the darkness bending and twisting around it as though it were part of the very night. "No," I whispered, taking a step back. But it didn't stop. The thing moved closer, and as it did, the fog thickened, the air turning colder with each passing second. My limbs felt heavy, weighed down by an invisible force. "Jacob," the voice slithered into my mind again, clearer this time, more forceful. "You came to find me." I shook my head, terror gripping my chest like a vice. "No. I didn't know." The Shadow Wraith paused, its shape flickering like a dying flame. "Liar." Before I could respond, it lunged. I fell backward, the weight of it crashing into me like a tidal wave of darkness. I tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the fog, by the thing that enveloped me. Its touch was ice cold, burning my skin with an unnatural chill that made my bones ache. I could feel it seeping into me, invading my mind, my thoughts, my very soul. I clawed at the ground, desperate for escape, but the more I struggled, the tighter its grip became. My vision blurred, the world spinning as the shadows closed in around me. And then, through the haze, I heard it, a sound so faint it was almost drowned out by the pounding of my heart. Laughter. Not the laughter of joy or amusement, but something hollow, mocking. It echoed through the trees, growing louder, filling my ears until it became unbearable. I was losing. I could feel my mind slipping, the edges of reality fraying as the Shadow Wraith's laughter consumed me. "No!" I screamed with the last of my strength. I thrashed against the darkness, but it was too late. It had found me, and there was no escape. I don't remember how long I lay there, trapped beneath the weight of the shadows. Time lost all meaning in that suffocating dark. My body was numb, but my mind was unraveling. The Shadow Wraith didn't just consume you. It stripped you down, layer by layer, until there was nothing left but fear. I could still hear the laughter. That mocking, hollow sound that felt like it was burrowing into my skull. My thoughts were no longer my own. They twisted and contorted, echoing back at me in voices I didn't recognize, whispers that felt like they came from some deep, forgotten part of myself. "You knew," the voices said. "You always knew what was waiting for you." I wanted to deny it, to scream that I didn't, but deep down, the truth gnawed at me. I had always been drawn to the darkness, to the unknown. I had come looking for the monster, and now it had found me. And there was no one to blame but myself. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the rustling of leaves. The sensation of the forest returned in fragmented pieces, the smell of damp earth, the distant chirp of crickets. But the world felt different now, warped by the darkness that had taken hold of me. I struggled to sit up, my body heavy and unresponsive. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the twisted trees around me, their branches curling like skeletal fingers. The clearing was empty, no sign of the figure, no sign of the wraith. But the cold remained, an unnatural chill that gnawed at my bones. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe it was gone. Maybe I had escaped. But then I saw it. A reflection in the shards of the broken mirror. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. There, staring back at me from the shattered glass, was my own face, twisted, distorted, but undeniably mine. And yet, it wasn't me. The eyes were wrong. Dark, hollow, filled with the same malevolent gleam I had seen in the wraith's eyes. They stared at me with a cold, detached amusement, as if they were studying me, waiting for something. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. No, this isn't real. It's just another trick. But the reflection didn't waver. It tilted its head, mimicking my movements, but the smile didn't belong to me. It was the wraith's smile, stretching unnaturally wide, exposing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. And then it spoke. "Did you think you could escape me, Jacob?" The voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was loud, clear, cutting through the silence of the forest like a knife. It came from the reflection, but it echoed inside my head, reverberating through my very being. I stumbled further away, but no matter how far I moved, the reflection stayed with me, hovering just at the edge of my vision. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, desperation clawing at my throat. The reflection chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "I want what you promised me." "I didn't promise you anything." I shouted, but even as the words left my mouth, I felt a flicker of doubt. Hadn't I? The moment I set foot in these woods, hadn't I, in some way, called to it? Invited it in? The reflection grew darker, the twisted smile widening further until it seemed to split my face in two. "Oh, but you did. You came here searching for me, and now you'll never leave." The ground beneath me trembled, and I felt it again, the pull of the shadows, creeping into my skin, my mind. The laughter returned, louder now, as if the whole forest was mocking me. I turned and ran, my legs burning with the effort, but no matter how fast I moved, the reflection followed. The trees warped around me, the path twisting into an impossible labyrinth. My breath came in ragged gasps, the cold air burning my lungs, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let it take me. But then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Not mine, not the wraith's, but something else. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. I skidded to a halt, my heart racing, and turned toward the sound. The fog parted, revealing a figure standing just a few feet away. It wasn't the wraith. It was me. I stared in horror as the other me stepped forward, its eyes gleaming with that same dark light. It wore the same clothes, the same face, But the smile was wrong. Too wide, too sharp. "Jacob," it said, its voice smooth, almost gentle. "You can't run from yourself." I backed away, but the ground beneath me gave way, and I tumbled into the dirt. The other me stepped closer, towering over me now, its eyes boring into mine. "This is what you wanted, isn't it? To become part of the legend? To be remembered?" I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "No. I just wanted to understand. I didn't want this." The smile widened, grotesque and monstrous. "You don't get to choose." It reached down, its hand cold and solid, wrapping around my wrist. I tried to pull away, but its grip was like iron, unyielding. The darkness spread from its touch, crawling up my arm, sinking into my skin. I screamed, thrashing against it, but it was no use. The shadows swallowed me whole, dragging me down into the abyss. And in that final moment, as the darkness closed over me, I understood. The wraith had never been a creature of the forest. It had never been something external. It was me, my own fear, my own darkness, given shape and form. And now, it had claimed me. The last thing I heard before the world went silent was the echo of my own voice, laughing, as the reflection stared back at me from the abyss. Necropolis. Have you ever walked into a place and felt that something was off? Not just strange, but deeply, unsettlingly wrong? That's what hit me the moment I stepped off the train. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on, not at first. The platform was empty, the air thick with silence, and for a town that had once been a bustling center of life, the stillness was eerie. I had come to this forgotten corner of the country for work, or at least that was the official reason. My boss had sent me to gather some records from a property that had recently gone up for auction. The town itself was hardly on the map anymore, just a cluster of decaying buildings left behind by time. My plan was simple: get in, collect the documents, and get out. A few hours at most. As I made my way down the deserted streets, a chill crept up my spine. The buildings loomed tall and hollow, their windows like empty eyes watching me pass. No cars. No voices. No movement. Just the occasional gust of wind rattling the broken shutters. Something about this place felt alive in a way that made me deeply uncomfortable, though I couldn't explain why. I quickened my pace, eager to reach the address. It's just an old town, I told myself. People move on. Places die. There's nothing strange about that. But the closer I got, the heavier the air became. I could almost hear it, faint whispers carried on the breeze, barely audible but persistent, like the echo of voices long silenced. I stopped, straining to listen, but the sound vanished as quickly as it had come. Shaking it off, I continued forward, turning the final corner to see the house I'd been sent to, an old Victorian, its once grand facade now crumbling with age. The windows were dark, but something about them gave me the impression of being watched. The heavy wooden door creaked as I pushed it open, and I stepped into the dimly lit interior. The house was cold. Not just cold, freezing. I could see my breath clouding the air in front of me. Dust blanketed every surface, untouched for what seemed like decades. The silence inside was suffocating, more intense than it had been outside, as though the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for something. As I moved deeper into the house, I felt it again, that sensation of being observed, but this time stronger. My eyes darted to the corners of the room, but there was no one there. I forced myself to keep moving, reminding myself why I was here. The documents. Just get the documents. The stairs creaked beneath my weight as I made my way up to the second floor. A sense of unease settled over me like a heavy fog, making each step feel more difficult than the last. When I reached the landing, I froze. There, at the end of the hallway, was a mirror. I hadn't seen it before, and yet it felt as though it had always been there, waiting for me. Its surface was dark, nearly opaque, but as I stepped closer, shapes began to form, indistinct at first, but gradually sharpening into something terrifyingly familiar. They were faces. Dozens of them, staring back at me from the glass. Not reflections, not my face, but the faces of strangers. Their eyes wide, their mouths twisted in silent screams. And among them, one stood out, a woman, her pale face framed by dark hair, her expression hollow and lifeless. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. The faces vanished, leaving only my own reflection in the cracked glass. My hands were shaking. It must have been a trick of the light, I told myself. Just my mind playing tricks. But the feeling didn't go away. I turned to leave, but the moment my back was to the mirror, the air seemed to change. It was subtle at first, a shift in the atmosphere, like the room itself had grown smaller, more confined. And then I heard it. A faint sound, like footsteps, coming from somewhere behind me. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. The footsteps stopped. I stood there, frozen, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The silence pressed in again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It was thick, oppressive, as if the air itself had a weight to it. Suddenly, the floorboards creaked, and this time, the sound was unmistakable. Something, or someone, was moving in the house. My heart raced as I bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping in my haste. I had to get out, had to leave this place before whatever was in here found me. I reached the front door, but just as my hand touched the doorknob, it wouldn't budge. Locked. But I hadn't locked it. That's when I felt it, a presence, cold and suffocating, standing right behind me. The air shifted, and I could hear breathing, not mine, but something else, something that had been waiting for me all along. I didn't dare turn around. I froze, my hand still gripping the door handle. The air was thick with dread, the kind that seeps into your bones, paralyzing you. I could feel it, feel whatever was behind me, close enough that the cold radiated from it, wrapping around me like an icy grip. I told myself to run, to turn the handle harder, to slam the door open, but my body wouldn't move. It felt as though something was rooting me to the spot, holding me in place. My skin prickled with fear, and the breathing, slow, deliberate, was now almost in my ear. Gathering what little courage I had left, I forced myself to act. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, I twisted the knob and threw my weight against the door. It flew open, and I stumbled out into the night, gasping for air as if I had been drowning. The street was still empty, silent, but the oppressive feeling didn't leave me. I glanced back at the house, half expecting to see a figure standing in the doorway, watching me. But there was nothing. Just the dark, gaping entrance, like the mouth of some ancient creature that had swallowed me whole and then spat me out. I didn't wait. I ran. The sound of my footsteps echoed unnaturally against the cobbled streets, too loud in the quiet night. The houses around me felt wrong now, too. I could sense eyes on me from the broken windows, hidden figures lurking just beyond my sight. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me, as though trying to pull me back into their depths. And those whispers, the ones I heard earlier, were louder now, a constant low hum just on the edge of hearing. The words weren't clear, but the tone was unmistakable. They wanted something. I had to get back to the train station, back to safety, but with every step, the town seemed to stretch, warping in a way that didn't make sense. Streets that had been straightforward before now twisted at impossible angles, leading me in circles. Panic was rising in my chest. I didn't want to admit it, but I was lost. Completely, utterly lost in a town that should have been too small to get lost in. I stopped to catch my breath, leaning against a lamp post, my hands trembling. That's when I noticed the first figure. At the far end of the street, barely visible in the dim light, stood a man. His posture was unnaturally rigid, and he seemed to be staring right at me. I couldn't make out his face, but I could feel his gaze burning into me. I stepped back instinctively, but then I saw another figure, to my right, this one a woman, standing in the doorway of an old shop. She, too, was staring, unmoving, her pale face shadowed under the brim of a wide hat. My pulse quickened. More of them were appearing, emerging from the shadows like they had been there all along, waiting for me to notice. They didn't move, just watched, silent and still, but their presence was overwhelming. It felt as though the entire town had come alive with these things, these echoes of people that once were. I backed away slowly, but no matter which direction I turned, there they were, silent sentinels, blocking every path. I had nowhere to go. That's when I remembered the mirror. The faces I'd seen weren't just reflections, they were these people, these figures that had somehow been trapped here, lingering in the space between life and death. And now, I was trapped with them. I couldn't stay still. I couldn't let them get closer, even though they hadn't moved a step. The air around me felt heavier, colder, the temperature dropping so fast I could see frost forming on the stones beneath my feet. I had to find another way out. There, at the end of the street, barely visible through the swirling fog, was the outline of an alley. Without thinking, I darted toward it, pushing through the oppressive cold that clung to me like a second skin. The alley was narrow and winding, the walls closing on either side. I could hear the whispering again, clearer this time. It sounded like my name, being called over and over, beckoning me deeper into the twisting maze. But I couldn't turn back now, not with whatever was waiting for me in the streets behind. I stumbled through the alley, the walls scraping my arms as I pressed forward. Just when I thought I was about to hit a dead end, the path opened up, leading me into a small courtyard. And there, in the center, stood a single figure. It was the woman from the mirror, the one whose face had stood out among the others. She was real now, standing in front of me, her dark hair hanging in loose, wet strands over her pale, hollow face. Her eyes locked onto mine, empty and cold. For a moment, neither of us moved. My heart pounded in my ears, and the cold seemed to tighten around my chest. Then, slowly, she raised her hand, pointing directly at me. "You don't belong here," she whispered, her voice like the rustling of dead leaves. I tried to step back, but my feet wouldn't move. Her eyes held me, freezing me in place. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me, and I realized with growing horror that the figures from the streets had followed me. They were closing in, surrounding the courtyard, their dead, accusing eyes fixed on me. I was cornered, and there was nowhere left to run. The air in the courtyard was stifling, heavy with something far worse than just cold. It was as if the weight of the entire town had pressed down on me, suffocating me with the same silent menace that those figures brought. I tried to force my legs to move, to run, to escape, but I was rooted in place, caught in the gaze of the woman who now stood at the center of my fear. Her hand remained outstretched, finger pointing directly at me, as if she was accusing me of some terrible crime. Her lips moved, but no sound came out this time, only the haunting echoes of those whispers that seemed to come from every corner of the town. The figures, once distant shadows on the streets, were now inching closer, surrounding the courtyard in a silent procession. Their eyes were empty, expressionless, but the intensity of their collective gaze made me feel like I was drowning under their scrutiny. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked in my throat, caught in the overwhelming pressure of the moment. My heart was beating so fast, I thought it might burst. My mind raced for answers, for some way to escape, but the truth was starting to sink in. I had stumbled into something far beyond my understanding, something that wasn't meant to be disturbed. The woman's pale face twisted into a grim expression, her eyes narrowing. She stepped closer, her movements slow, deliberate, as if she knew that I had nowhere to go. The others followed, moving in sync with her, like shadows trailing behind a source of light. "You woke them," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. "You brought them back." I shook my head violently, my voice finally breaking free. "I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do anything." She tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes boring into me. "You disturbed the past. And now, you must pay." I felt a cold shiver run through my spine, realizing with horror what she meant. The files, the documents I was sent to retrieve, they were connected to this place, to its past. I had been naive, thinking it was just an abandoned town or relic of a forgotten era. But it was more than that. It was a graveyard of memories, and I had accidentally opened a door that was never meant to be unlocked. The whispers grew louder, like 1,000 voices merging into one. They pressed in on me from all sides, and I realized that they weren't just voices, they were thoughts, emotions, fragments of the lives that had once been lived in this place. These people, these things were trapped here, caught in a limbo between life and death, and somehow I had become a part of their twisted world. I tried to back away, but the woman was faster. Her hand shot out, cold fingers wrapping around my wrist with a grip that felt more like iron than flesh. I gasped, feeling the icy chill of her touch seep into my skin, burning like frostbite. "You can't leave," she said softly, her voice laced with something that resembled pity. "Not anymore." I yanked my arm back, but her grip was impossibly strong. Panic surged through me as I struggled to free myself, the figures around us closing in tighter, their faces blank but menacing. "I'm not staying here," I shouted, pulling harder, but her hand held fast. "I'm not like you. I'm alive. I don't belong here." For a moment, her expression softened. She leaned in closer, her breath icy against my skin, and whispered, "None of us did." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. None of us did. These people had once been alive, just like me, living their lives in this town before something terrible had happened. They hadn't chosen this fate, just as I hadn't, but now they were bound here, trapped forever in this shadow of existence. I wasn't going to let that happen to me. With a surge of adrenaline, I yanked my wrist free, stumbling backward and nearly falling. The woman's hand dropped, but her gaze never left me. The figures around us seemed to ripple, shifting closer as if they could sense my desperation. There was no time to think. I turned and bolted, running through the alleyways as fast as my legs could carry me. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart pounding in my chest, but I didn't dare look back. I could hear them behind me, the whispering, the shuffling of unseen feet, closing in, faster and faster. The streets twisted around me like a maze, each turn leading me deeper into the heart of the town rather than out. It didn't make sense. The layout had changed. Buildings that should have been familiar were now strange, distorted. It was as if the town itself was trying to keep me here, bending reality to trap me within its haunted borders. My mind raced. There had to be a way out. There had to be. I rounded another corner and found myself back in front of the Victorian house. The door was wide open now, like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. For a brief second, I considered running past it, but something pulled me toward the entrance. Some unshakable instinct told me that whatever answers I needed, whatever way out, would be inside. I hesitated, my lungs burning from the sprint, but the whispering was getting louder, closer. I had no choice. With a final glance over my shoulder, I stepped back into the house. The moment I crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me, sealing me inside. And then, the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening. My breathing echoed off the decaying walls, and the cold that had followed me from the streets was even more intense here, almost unbearable. I stood frozen, staring into the darkness of the hallway. Then, slowly, the house began to shift around me. The walls creaked, groaning like something ancient and alive. Shadows moved, flickering along the edges of my vision. And from the depths of the house, I heard something else, something deeper than whispers. Footsteps. They were coming from above me, heavy and deliberate, moving down the stairs. This was it. Whatever was in this house, whatever had trapped those people, was coming for me. And this time, there would be no running. The footsteps were slow but purposeful, echoing through the house like the ticking of a clock, counting down to something inevitable. My pulse raced, but my body was paralyzed with fear. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere left to go. The house had closed in around me, sealing my fate. I pressed myself against the wall, my eyes fixed on the staircase at the far end of the hallway. The shadows at the top shifted, warping into unnatural shapes as something descended from the darkness. I couldn't make out what it was, not yet, but I knew, deep in my gut, that whatever was coming, it wasn't human. The cold was unbearable now, biting through my skin like sharp blades. My breath came out in short, visible gasps, clouding the air in front of me. The sound of the footsteps grew louder, closer, and finally, I saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows at the top of the stairs. It was the woman from before, the one I had seen in the mirror, the one who had spoken to me in the courtyard. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her, more figures followed, their faces twisted and warped by whatever horror had claimed them. Their eyes were dark, hollow voids, their skin pale and stretched tight over bone. I backed away, my hands trembling, but the woman's gaze never wavered. She descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate, her eyes locked onto mine. The figures behind her followed in eerie silence, their movements synchronized like puppets on invisible strings. "You should have left when you had the chance," she said, her voice soft, but laced with an edge of finality. I tried. My voice came out hoarse, cracked with panic. "I didn't mean to." "It doesn't matter now," she interrupted, her voice calm, almost gentle. "The moment you entered this place, the past claimed you." The words sent a fresh wave of terror through me. I shook my head, my back pressed against the cold wall. No, this can't be real. I'm not one of you. I don't belong here." She stopped at the base of the stairs, standing just a few feet away from me. The other figures hovered behind her, their faces unreadable, but I could feel their presence, oppressive and suffocating. "You woke the memories," she said, her voice growing softer. You disturbed what should have been left in silence. This town, it's not like others. It remembers. And now, you are a part of it. I opened my mouth to argue, to deny her words, but something deep inside me knew she was right. From the moment I had set foot here, I had felt it, that invisible thread pulling me deeper, winding tighter around me. The documents I had come to collect were more than just papers. They were the remnants of a past that had refused to die. And now, it had consumed me. But I didn't mean to, I whispered, more to myself than to her. I didn't mean to bring any of this back. The woman's expression softened, a strange sadness passing through her hollow eyes. None of us meant for it to happen, she said. But meaning doesn't change what is. Suddenly, the house groaned, the walls shuddering as if in response to her words. The floor beneath me trembled, and I felt the pressure around me grow heavier, thicker. It was like the air itself was alive, pressing down on me, suffocating me. The shadows twisted and writhed along the walls, and the figures behind the woman began to move, creeping closer. My heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I can't stay here, I gasped, my voice barely audible. I can't. You don't have a choice, she said softly. Before I could react, her hand shot out, gripping my arm with the same icy coldness as before. The moment her fingers touched me, I felt a wave of nausea crash over me, as if the very life was being drained from my body. My vision blurred, the room spinning around me. No! I screamed, trying to pull away, but her grip tightened, unrelenting. The other figures moved in closer, their eyes locked onto me, their faces a twisted reflection of pain and despair. I felt their presence pressing in from all sides, suffocating me, drowning me in a sea of terror. My mind raced, desperate for a way out, for any escape. And then, through the haze of fear, I remembered the mirror. The mirror in the hallway, the one that had shown me the faces of the dead. If the mirror had shown them to me, maybe, just maybe, it could set me free. With every ounce of strength I had left, I wrenched myself free from the woman's grasp and bolted toward the hallway. I could hear her footsteps behind me, faster now, almost frantic, but I didn't stop. I tore through the narrow corridor, my eyes fixed on the dark, cracked surface of the mirror at the far end. The figures were behind me, their whispers now a deafening roar, but I couldn't let them catch me. I reached the mirror and skidded to a stop, my breath coming in ragged gasps. For a moment, I hesitated, unsure of what to do. Then, with a trembling hand, I reached out and touched the glass. The moment my fingers made contact, the world around me shattered. The house, the figures, the whispers, all of it dissolved into a blinding white light, so bright that it burned my eyes. I stumbled back, my mind reeling, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I thought I had died. But then, the light faded, and I was standing in the middle of the empty street. The town was silent again, just as it had been when I first arrived. The buildings stood lifeless, the windows dark. There were no figures watching me from the shadows, no whispers carried on the wind. It was over. I collapsed onto the ground, my entire body shaking with exhaustion and relief. I had escaped. I was alive. But as I looked up at the empty windows, I realized something terrible. I wasn't alone. I could still feel them, all of them, watching from the corners of my mind, their presence etched into my soul like a scar that would never heal. I had escaped the town, but I had brought its ghosts with me. Forever. Shadow behind. Have you ever felt, even for a moment, that something is off? If you'd asked me back then, my answer would have been simple, yes. I stepped out for my usual morning walk, just like any other day. A light autumn breeze played with the leaves, and the first rays of sunlight barely touched the park's path. Routine. Something that usually puts my mind at ease. But that morning, something was different. Something wasn't right. It all began when I noticed my shadow. Or rather, I noticed it behaving oddly. At first, I thought it was just the low sun casting strange shapes. Shadows can be tricky in the early hours, right? I kept walking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a trick of the light. My shadow, it wasn't quite following me. I'd take a step, and there'd be a brief hesitation, as though it were catching up. I stopped, turned around. The world was still. My shadow, stretched out before me on the pavement, looked normal again, perfectly in line with my movements. I laughed it off. Great, now I'm scaring myself with my own shadow, I muttered. But even as I tried to push the thought away, the unease lingered. As I continued walking, I became hyper-aware of every step, every shift in the light. My shadow moved in sync with me, just as it should. But every now and then, out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch it, a subtle twitch, like it was moving just a fraction of a second behind. I quickened my pace, testing it, but the shadow stayed with me. Almost. Then, something happened that sent a shiver down my spine. I came to a stop, and for a split second, my shadow didn't. It took one more step. I froze. The park was empty. Just me and it. Okay, that's new, I whispered to myself, trying to calm my racing heart. The rational part of my brain wanted to explain it all away. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the angle of the light was playing tricks. But the feeling that something unnatural was happening was growing stronger. I decided to cut the walk short and head home. I could feel my nerves unraveling, and the thought of being inside felt like safety. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something else. The shadow wasn't behind me anymore, it was to my left. I hadn't changed direction. It had. A chill crept through me. I quickly glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone lurking nearby, but the path was still empty. Just me, the whispering leaves, and that thing. My shadow. Get a grip, I muttered to myself, willing the fear to dissipate. I took another step, and it mirrored me perfectly, but I could still feel it. There was a tension, a subtle resistance, as if it were testing the limits of its existence. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding louder with each footfall. With every hurried step, I became increasingly aware of the distance between me and my shadow. It was always just a fraction off. I stopped again, turned, and for a moment, I swore it hesitated too. My mind raced with questions. Could shadows think? Could they be aware? Suddenly, I heard a soft sound, a whisper perhaps, but the park was empty. I was alone. Hello? I called out, the word hanging in the air. No response, just the rustle of the trees. I took a deep breath and forced myself to keep moving, heading towards the park's exit. But the further I went, the more it felt like something was pulling at me. A weight I couldn't see but could feel. My shadow started to elongate, stretching unnaturally as if it were reaching out to something beyond my control. Panic surged through me. I had to get out. As I approached the park gate, I decided to risk a glance behind me. I felt a strange compulsion to look, to confront whatever this was. But what I saw froze me in place. My shadow was no longer just a silhouette. It had started to take on form. A vague shape, shifting and swirling as if trying to break free from the confines of the ground. I stumbled back, a gasp escaping my lips. "What are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure in the shadows seemed to writhe, almost as if it was trying to communicate. I felt a connection, an urge to reach out, to understand, but fear held me back. Then it happened. The shadow stretched further, its tendrils reaching out like fingers grasping for me. I turned to run, but as I did, I felt an icy grip on my ankle, pulling me down. I fell to the ground, and in that instant, everything went dark. I was enveloped in a strange, suffocating void. My senses dulled, and I could feel the shadow swirling around me, its whispers now louder, more insistent. "Help me," it seemed to plead, yet the sound was haunting, echoing in the emptiness. Suddenly, I was back in the park, lying on the cold pavement, panting heavily. I glanced around, disoriented, but everything appeared normal. The sun was still shining, the trees swayed gently. My shadow lay still, right where it should be. I shot to my feet, scanning the area. Had it all been a nightmare? Just a trick of my mind? But as I looked down, my heart sank. My shadow wasn't behaving as it should. It remained perfectly still, a stark contrast to my frantic movements. Panic gripped me again. I turned to run, but a sudden thought stopped me dead in my tracks. What if it wasn't over? What if it had just been waiting, watching, planning its next move? I took a breath, fighting the urge to flee, and slowly turned back toward the shadow. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. In response, it rippled as if considering my words. Then, with a sudden jerk, it surged forward, and I felt a pull like never before. My heart raced as I realized this was no longer just about my shadow. It was a living, breathing entity, a dark reflection of something within me. And in that moment of realization, I understood, to confront it was to confront myself. But could I bear what I might find? The world around me blurred as the shadow lunged, its form merging with mine. I screamed, the sound swallowed by the silence of the park, as darkness enveloped me once more. The last thing I remembered was the sensation of falling deeper and deeper into a void of uncertainty until there was only silence. When I came to, I was back in my room, the morning sun pouring through the window. I sat up, heart pounding, drenched in sweat. Was it all a dream? I glanced around, taking in the familiar sights of my life. But as I looked down, my breath caught in my throat. The shadow was still there. Only now, it seemed to linger just a bit longer, almost as if it were waiting for me to acknowledge it. I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back. I had escaped the park, but had I truly escaped the shadow? A wave of disbelief washed over me. I pinched myself, hoping it was all a cruel joke or a figment of my imagination. But the pain in my arm was real, and the shadow at my feet felt alive, pulsating gently in the sunlight. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me, waiting for me to make my next move. What had I brought back with me? My mind raced with questions. Was it just my shadow, or was it something more sinister? I needed to get out of the house. I threw on some clothes, desperately trying to convince myself that fresh air would clear my head. As I stepped outside, I felt the weight of my shadow pressing down, like a dark cloud hovering just above me. The streets were bustling with morning life, and for a moment I found comfort in the normalcy around me. People hurried by, engrossed in their routines, unaware of the growing dread within me. But as I walked, I noticed something disturbing. My shadow moved in ways it shouldn't. When I stopped, it seemed to linger a moment longer, almost as if it were relishing the sunlight while I stood still. I quickened my pace, my heart racing, feeling the strange pull of my shadow again. Was it leading me somewhere? Or was it simply biding its time? I made my way to a nearby cafe, hoping the aroma of fresh coffee would calm my frayed nerves. As I ordered my drink, I glanced out the window, and what I saw made my stomach drop. People passed by with their shadows perfectly aligned, moving in unison. But mine twisted and flickered as if it were a living entity disconnected from me. It danced on the pavement, swirling in patterns that felt deliberate, almost mocking. I took my coffee and found a small table outside, needing to collect my thoughts. My mind swirled with the events of the morning. Had I truly returned from the park, or was I still caught in its web? Then I saw it. A child playing on the sidewalk, laughing and chasing their shadow. It was a simple game, innocent and pure. But then I noticed the child's shadow did something strange. It seemed to lift, rising slightly off the ground, as if trying to break free. The child giggled, unaware of the creeping darkness that hovered just above them. My heart raced. I had to warn them. "Hey, watch out for your shadow," I shouted, but my voice felt swallowed by the chatter of the cafe. The child paused, glancing back at me, confusion in their eyes. Their shadow fell back into place, but the flicker of something strange remained, a brief moment that felt foreboding. I stood up, urgency flooding my veins. "Please, be careful," I called again, but the child just laughed and resumed playing, oblivious to the threat. Frustrated, I turned away, and that's when I felt it, the icy grip around my heart tightening once more. I was being pulled back. The shadow was hungry, and it wanted more than just to lurk in my presence. It wanted to consume. Without thinking, I dashed into the street, my feet pounding against the pavement as I ran, dodging bewildered pedestrians. I needed to escape, to put distance between me and that dark presence. But it felt like the further I went, the stronger the connection became. I raced toward the park, the very place I thought I had left behind. As I approached, the trees loomed larger, casting elongated shadows that twisted and contorted in the wind. The familiar path felt foreign now, tainted by the darkness I'd experienced just hours before. Panic surged within me as I entered the park, but something compelled me forward. The whispers in the wind seemed to call my name, beckoning me deeper into the shadows. I fought against the urge to succumb, but it was too strong. The park was empty, a stark contrast to the morning bustle. I reached the center, the spot where I had first felt the presence of my shadow. It was as if the air had thickened, and the world around me fell silent. And then I saw it again, my shadow, dancing with abandon, a dark figure swirling and shifting. It was no longer just a silhouette, it had taken on form, a manifestation of my fears and insecurities. I could see a face within it, twisted and distorted, echoing my own features but lacking any warmth. "What do you want from me?" I yelled, the sound echoing in the stillness. "Why won't you leave me alone?" The shadow seemed to pause, as if considering my words. Then, in a surge of dark energy, it lunged toward me. I staggered back, fear flooding my veins. The air grew colder, and the whispers intensified, forming a cacophony that filled my mind. "Help me," it hissed, the voice warped and distorted, resonating from the very core of my being. I felt the shadows around me begin to close in, and I realized what it wanted. It craved release, not just for itself, but for the parts of me I had buried deep inside. The darkness that I had hidden away, the fears that had haunted me, all fed this creature that now stood before me. In that moment, I understood. To confront my shadow was to confront myself, to accept the parts of me that I had tried to ignore. But could I do it? The shadow surged again, and with every ounce of strength I had left, I shouted, "I won't let you take me. I refuse to be your prisoner." As my voice echoed through the park, I felt a sudden warmth envelop me. It spread through my body, pushing against the cold that had taken hold. I could see the flicker in my shadow's eyes, the uncertainty. "Stop fighting me," it cried, the voice now softer, more pleading. "Embrace me. Let me be a part of you." I hesitated, grappling with the truth of its words. Could I truly accept the darkness within me? With a deep breath, I stepped forward, allowing myself to feel the fear, the pain, the isolation. I extended my hand, and as I did, the shadow hesitated once more, a flicker of vulnerability passing across its distorted face. "Okay," I whispered, "let's do this together." In that moment of acceptance, the shadow surged forward, enveloping me in darkness. But rather than feeling consumed, I felt a surge of power coursing through me. The darkness was no longer something to be feared. It was a part of me, a piece of my identity that I could finally acknowledge. As the shadows receded, I opened my eyes, finding myself back in the park, surrounded by light. My shadow lay at my feet, still but different, less menacing, more like a reflection of who I truly was. I had faced the darkness and emerged whole, albeit forever changed. But then, as I took a step forward, I felt the familiar tug again. Not of fear, but of connection. The shadow was still there, waiting, ready to walk alongside me as I embraced both the light and the dark. I knew now that I could no longer ignore it, and with a deep breath, I stepped into the day, shadow in tow. Cursed Road. Have you ever found yourself in a place that feels eerily familiar yet frighteningly wrong? I remember that night all too well. The sky hung low, wrapped in a shroud of darkness that seemed to swallow the world around me. My name is Alex, and I was just trying to get home after an exhausting day at work. Little did I know that my routine drive would plunge me into a nightmare. It began as a simple decision. I had taken a shortcut, a winding road that promised to save me time. As I turned onto the narrow path, the familiar comforts of home slipped away, replaced by a sense of foreboding that clung to the air like fog. The trees loomed high above me, their branches clawing at the night sky. I could hardly see the road ahead, illuminated only by the dim beam of my headlights. The road was empty, devoid of any signs of life. As I drove further, I began to notice peculiarities. The darkness seemed to pulse, almost alive, with every turn I took. I tried to shake off the unease settling in my stomach, but it grew heavier with each mile. Shadows danced just beyond the reach of my headlights, teasing the edge of my vision. Was it just my imagination, or was there something lurking in the dark? I glanced at the clock on my dashboard, 10:30 at night. I had driven for over an hour, yet I felt no closer to home. The trees, once a comforting canopy, now felt like prison bars, trapping me in this desolate corridor. Panic began to creep in, a tight knot forming in my chest. I rolled down the window, hoping for a breath of fresh air to clear my mind, but the night was silent, unnaturally so. Then, I saw it, a flicker of light in the distance, barely visible through the thick brush. Hope surged within me. Perhaps there was a town or a gas station nearby. I pressed on, eager to find any semblance of civilization. But as I drew nearer, my heart sank. The light flickered erratically, casting long, twisted shadows that danced along the ground. I slowed my car, my heart racing, unsure if I should approach or turn back. The light seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, inviting yet ominous. With a shaky breath, I stepped out of the vehicle. The cold night air wrapped around me, sending chills down my spine. I took a few hesitant steps toward the light, the crunch of gravel beneath my feet echoing in the stillness. That's when I noticed something odd. The light wasn't coming from a building or a street lamp, but from a small, cracked mirror leaning against a gnarled tree. It reflected the faint glow of my headlights, distorting the image in a way that sent shivers racing through me. As I peered closer, I realized the reflection didn't just show me, it showed the road behind me, the same road I had traveled for the last hour. A flicker of movement caught my eye. I spun around, scanning the darkness. Nothing. Just the heavy silence of the night. But the feeling of being watched settled over me like a thick fog. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, to get back into my car and drive away from this cursed road, but something kept me rooted to the spot. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. Perhaps it was just my imagination. Perhaps I was simply tired. I shook my head, forcing myself to focus. It was just a road. A simple road that led home. I walked back to my car, the unsettling feeling still lingering. I glanced at the mirror one last time before getting in, but the light flickered again, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a face staring back at me, twisted in agony. My breath hitched as I stumbled into the driver's seat, slamming the door behind me. With shaking hands, I turned the ignition, the engine roaring to life, cutting through the silence. I needed to get out of here. I needed to find my way home. As I drove off, I stole one last glance in the rearview mirror. The road behind me seemed endless, swallowed by darkness, but what chilled me to the bone was the knowledge that the familiar path was now a haunting memory. The journey continued, but I felt an unsettling shift within me, as if I were already changing in ways I couldn't yet understand. Little did I know, the road ahead would only lead me deeper into the abyss. The road stretched on, an endless ribbon of asphalt winding through the night. I tried to convince myself that I was merely tired, that the events of the past hour were just a figment of my imagination. But the unease clung to me like a second skin, tightening with every passing moment. I switched on the radio, hoping to drown out the silence. Static filled the car, punctuated by occasional bursts of ghostly music that did little to calm my nerves. As I drove, I noticed the trees lining the road growing thicker, their gnarled branches reaching toward me like skeletal fingers. The shadows deepened, enveloping my surroundings in a cloak of darkness that felt alive, watching, waiting. I shifted in my seat, glancing at the dashboard. My heart sank as I saw the clock read 10:45. Had I really been driving for only 15 minutes? A deep sense of foreboding settled over me. I was trapped in a cycle, an endless loop. I could almost hear whispers in the rustling leaves, murmurs of travelers long lost to this forsaken path. The thought sent shivers racing down my spine, but I couldn't afford to dwell on it. I had to keep moving, to escape this madness. Suddenly, I saw it again, a flash of light through the trees, brighter this time, beckoning me closer. Against my better judgment, I followed it, drawn like a moth to a flame. I thought perhaps I could find help, maybe even a way out of this nightmare. The trees closed in around me, creating a tunnel of darkness that felt increasingly claustrophobic. The light turned out to be another mirror, larger than the first, propped up against a rusty old sign that read "Welcome to Nowhere." The sign's paint was peeling, and the words seemed to shimmer in the darkness. I hesitated, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. The mirror reflected not just my image, but also the road ahead, warping it into something unrecognizable. As I stepped closer, a cold breeze swept through, carrying with it a scent of decay. I recoiled, a wave of nausea washing over me. I wanted to turn back, but curiosity held me captive. What was this place? Why was I drawn to these reflections? I looked again, and this time the mirror flickered violently. In the depths of its glass, I saw not just the road, but images of people, faces twisted in fear, their eyes pleading for help. I stumbled back, my breath quickening. Had I really seen that? Or was my mind playing tricks on me? I shook my head, trying to dispel the vision, but the images lingered, burning into my memory. I was losing my grip on reality, and I could feel it slipping away like sand through my fingers. With a sudden determination, I dashed back to my car, slamming the door shut behind me. I had to get out of this cursed place. I turned the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. But as I pulled away, I noticed something chilling. The trees lining the road appeared to shift, their positions rearranging themselves as I drove past. The way I had come was now blocked, an impenetrable wall of darkness. Panic clawed at my throat. I was trapped in a labyrinth with no escape. Every turn I took felt wrong, leading me deeper into the woods, further away from sanity. I pressed the gas pedal, desperate to find a way out, but the darkness closed in, and the road twisted and turned like a serpent, coiling around me, constricting my every move. The radio sputtered back to life, a distorted voice crackling through the speakers. "Turn back, don't look back," it echoed, resonating with my deepest fears. My heart raced as I flicked through the channels, trying to find something, anything, familiar, but the static only grew louder, drowning out the voice. Just when I thought I was lost forever, the trees parted, revealing a clearing bathed in an eerie moonlight. At the center stood an old, decrepit house, its windows dark and hollow. Something about it pulled me in, a sickening curiosity mingling with dread. Against my better judgment, I parked my car and stepped outside. The air was heavy, thick with anticipation. As I approached the house, I noticed the front door slightly ajar, creaking gently in the wind. I hesitated, a chill creeping down my spine. This place felt wrong, like stepping into a forgotten nightmare. But I had to know what lay inside. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The interior was dimly lit, the air stale and suffocating. Shadows lurked in every corner, shifting with the flicker of a lone candle burning on a dusty table. I stepped further in, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. Silence answered, heavy and suffocating. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of movement in my periphery. I spun around, heart racing, but the room was empty. Just me and the shadows. Then, I heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible, yet unmistakably there. "Help us." I froze, blood running cold in my veins. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The faces in the mirror, they were trapped here. I had to escape, to break this cycle before it consumed me too. But as I turned to flee, the door slammed shut behind me. The darkness thickened, closing in like a vice. I was no longer alone. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, a chorus of despair filling the room. "Join us," they begged. Desperation surged within me. I rushed to the windows, but they were barred, an impenetrable fortress of shadows. I was trapped. The realization of my fate settled in, a chilling certainty that I might never leave this place. Panic surged through me as I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. The whispers echoed around me, a haunting symphony that chilled my bones. "Join us, help us," the voices twisted together, rising and falling like the tide, a desperate plea that sent shivers racing down my spine. I felt the walls closing in, the shadows wrapping around me like a shroud. I turned, searching for an escape, my mind racing with fear. The candle flickered ominously, casting long, distorted shadows that danced menacingly along the walls. I needed to find a way out, but the house seemed to be alive, shifting and warping around me as if it were aware of my desperation. With no other choice, I dashed deeper into the house, hoping to find a window or back door. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of mildew and decay. Each step felt heavier, as if the very floorboards were trying to pull me down into the abyss. The whispers grew louder, echoing in my mind, drowning out my thoughts. "Help us." They were everywhere, echoing in the corners, bouncing off the walls, wrapping around me like a noose. I stumbled into what appeared to be a living room, the furniture draped in dusty white sheets, resembling ghosts from a time long past. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror, its surface dark and cracked. It was a sinister reflection of the other mirrors I had encountered. Drawn to it, I approached, my breath quickening. The whispers intensified, swirling around me in a cacophony of despair. I peered into the mirror, heart racing, and the world behind me warped into a nightmarish scene. I saw glimpses of figures, their faces twisted in agony, their mouths moving silently, pleading for release. I stepped back, terror clawing at my throat. Were these the souls trapped here, doomed to linger forever? I turned to leave, but the shadows seemed to stretch and grasp at me, clawing at my skin, trying to pull me back. Desperation fueled my actions. I ran back toward the front door, the echoes of the whispers trailing behind me, taunting, mocking. But just as I reached for the handle, the air around me grew thick with a suffocating energy. The door stood firm, refusing to budge. "Join us," the voices now screamed in unison, their pitch rising to a terrifying crescendo. I spun around, panic coursing through my veins. The figures from the mirror materialized before me, their faces a tapestry of sorrow and despair. They reached out, fingers elongated, clawing at the air as if they could pull me into their nightmare. I stumbled back, falling against the wall. "No! Stay away from me!" I screamed, but my voice felt small against the torrent of terror that surrounded me. In that moment of desperation, I remembered the flashlight in my bag. I fumbled through the darkness, heart racing as I felt the cold metal against my fingers. I flicked it on, the beam slicing through the shadows, illuminating the room. The light pushed back against the darkness, and for a brief moment, the figures recoiled, their ghastly forms retreating into the corners, shrieking in frustration. "Leave me alone!" I shouted, my voice shaking but determined. The beam of light pulsed, illuminating the mirror once more. It reflected my fear, but also a glimmer of hope. Maybe this mirror was my way out. I stepped toward it, heart pounding. With every step, the whispers turned frantic, the figures in the room writhing in agony as if my defiance was a threat to their existence. "Help us! You can't escape. You belong to us now," they cried, their voices echoing through the air, a desperate plea that resonated deep within me. I reached the mirror, the light from the flashlight illuminating its cracked surface. I could feel a force pulling at me, an undeniable connection that tugged at the very core of my being. "Please, let me go," I shouted, pushing against the glass, the light reflecting back at me, a shimmering barrier between two worlds. And then, in an instant, the mirror rippled like water. A voice, strong and clear, broke through the chaos. "You must choose. Face your fear, or be consumed by it." I hesitated, the weight of their words crashing over me. I was standing on the edge of oblivion, and I had to make a choice. I took a deep breath, recalling the faces in the mirror, the agony etched into every feature. I couldn't abandon them. I couldn't let myself become one of them. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stepped closer to the mirror. The darkness surged, reaching for me with icy fingers, but I raised the flashlight high, letting its beam pierce the shadows. "I won't give in. I choose to fight," I yelled, and as the words left my mouth, the mirror shimmered, the images swirling violently. The figures screamed, their faces contorting in rage and fear. I felt the mirror pulse, a wave of energy crashing over me. The shadows writhed, and for a moment I thought I would be pulled in, swallowed by the darkness. But I held my ground, my heart pounding in my chest. With a final push, I thrust my hand toward the mirror, the beam of light connecting with its surface. The glass shattered like ice, sending a shockwave of light spilling through the room. The whispers turned into wails of agony, drowning in the brilliance. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for impact as the light enveloped me, illuminating the darkness with a blinding radiance. And then, silence. I opened my eyes slowly, blinking against the brightness. I was lying in the middle of the road, my car parked beside me, the night sky above untouched by the horrors I had just faced. The trees were silent, and the air felt fresh, no longer thick with dread. Confusion washed over me as I sat up, glancing around. Had it all been a nightmare? But as I looked closer, I noticed the faint shimmer of glass fragments scattered around me, glinting in the moonlight. The memory of the house, the whispers, and the faces surged back into my mind, a vivid reminder of the terror I had escaped. I had fought and won, but at what cost? Rising to my feet, I stumbled toward my car, my body aching with exhaustion. I needed to get out of here, to put as much distance between me and that cursed road as possible. I climbed into the driver's seat, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. The road ahead appeared clear, stretching into the unknown, but a lingering sense of unease gnawed at me. I turned the ignition, the engine rumbling to life. As I drove away, I cast one last glance in the rearview mirror. The road behind me twisted and turned, shadows lingering at the edges of the trees, a stark reminder of the darkness I had faced. I could still feel their eyes on me, a haunting presence that would never truly fade. As I drove on, the landscape shifted. I could feel the isolation creeping back in, the silence heavy and suffocating. The echoes of the past whispered in my ears, a constant reminder of the choices I had made. I had survived, but I knew I was forever changed. The journey had taken its toll, and the psychological scars would remain. The road ahead beckoned, but uncertainty loomed in the distance. I was alive, yet I felt the weight of the shadows following me, an invisible tether to the darkness I had left behind. My heart raced as I pressed the accelerator, the headlights cutting through the night. I needed to find a way back to reality, to escape the grasp of the supernatural that had entwined itself around my life. But as I drove further, the familiar feeling of dread began to return, creeping back like an unwelcome guest. I glanced down at the clock, 10:55. It was as if time itself had played a cruel trick on me. Suddenly, a flicker of light caught my eye. My heart sank as I recognized the same pulsing glow in the distance. A mirror? No, it couldn't be. The road twisted again, and just as before, the landscape shifted, the trees bending and warping as if mocking my escape. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest. Panic flooded my veins. I was not free. I was trapped once more in the cycle of despair. The whispering voices returned, calling out to me, weaving through my mind like a dark tapestry. Help us, help us. And as I stared into the encroaching darkness, I realized the truth. No matter how far I ran, the shadows would always be a part of me. The cursed road had become my reality, and the darkness would forever haunt my steps, pulling me back into its embrace. The headlights dimmed, flickering as the engine sputtered, and in that moment, I understood. The journey would never end. I was bound to this road, destined to roam its depths, forever caught in the echoes of dread. The mysterious train. Have you ever felt a presence behind you, even when you're alone? I did, on that fateful night. It was a late autumn evening, and the air was crisp with the scent of falling leaves. I stepped onto the platform, my breath forming small clouds in the chill. The train, a sleek silver serpent, awaited me, its doors yawning open like a mouth ready to swallow me whole. I found my seat by the window, feeling the reassuring vibration of the train beneath me as it prepared to leave. The dim interior was lit by flickering overhead lights, casting shadows that danced across the seats. I glanced around. The carriage was sparsely populated. A few tired travelers, their faces illuminated by the glow of their phones, seemed lost in their own worlds. But something was off. The first hint of unease crept in when I noticed that most of the passengers didn't cast reflections in the glass. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of the light. Perhaps the windows were just too dirty, or maybe I was imagining things after a long day of travel. I shook my head, attempting to dispel the growing tension within me. As the train rumbled down the tracks, the rhythmic clattering of wheels lulled me into a sense of security. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that it was just a simple journey. Yet, with each passing mile, an inexplicable dread settled deeper in my gut. I glanced at my watch. 10 minutes until departure, or was it 10 minutes too late? The train jolted suddenly, pulling me from my thoughts. I looked up, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a figure standing at the far end of the carriage, cloaked in shadow. My heart raced, and I blinked rapidly, willing the figure to vanish. Yet, as the train continued to gather speed, I realized it remained a dark silhouette, unmoving and unsettling. I shifted in my seat, trying to focus on the scenery outside, but the darkness enveloped the landscape, stretching into a void. The lights in the carriage flickered again, casting eerie shadows that seemed to creep closer, inch by inch. My pulse quickened as I felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. The other passengers appeared oblivious to the growing tension. As the minutes ticked by, whispers echoed in the air, soft and indistinct, almost like the rustle of dry leaves. I strained to listen, but the sound seemed to ebb and flow, elusive and mocking. A chill raced down my spine, and I felt the air around me thicken, as if I were suffocating in a fog of uncertainty. I turned to the passenger beside me, a middle-aged man with weary eyes. I opened my mouth to speak, to share the unease that clung to me like a second skin, but when I looked at him, I recoiled in horror. His eyes, dull and lifeless, seemed to gaze through me rather than at me. "Excuse me," I stammered. "Are you okay?" My voice sounded foreign in my own ears, shaky and thin. He didn't respond, and in that moment, I knew. I was not just a passenger on this train. I had crossed into something unfathomable, something beyond my understanding. The others were trapped, just like me, passengers on a journey to nowhere. With dread creeping into my bones, I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. The train rattled violently, as if it sensed my panic. I took a tentative step toward the door, my mind racing with thoughts of escape, but something deep within me knew that leaving might not be an option. As I moved, I caught a glimpse of my own reflection in the glass. My face, pale and drawn, stared back at me, but there was a flicker of something else, something lurking behind my eyes. A shadow danced across my reflection, and in that instant, I felt a cold grip of despair wrap around me. Was I truly alone, or had I been consumed by the very darkness I sought to escape? The train hurtled onward, a relentless force carrying me into the unknown, and I was left to wonder if I would ever find my way back to the light. This journey had only just begun, and the question loomed, how far would I have to go before I could break free? The train continued to rattle along the tracks, a relentless beast in the night. I gripped the back of the seat in front of me, my knuckles white, fighting against the rising tide of panic. The feeling of being trapped grew more suffocating with each passing moment. With a deep breath, I decided to confront the growing unease rather than let it consume me. I turned back to the man beside me. "Do you know where this train is headed?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He blinked slowly, as if the question took an eternity to reach him. "It goes where it wants," he replied, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. A chill slithered down my spine, and I stepped away from him, seeking solace in the moving landscape outside. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, hoping to ground myself in the familiar sight of passing trees and flickering lights. But there was nothing familiar about this train ride. The outside world was swallowed by an inky blackness, leaving only a void. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently, plunging the carriage into darkness. Gasps echoed in the cramped space, a chorus of fear. I felt my heart race as I tried to keep calm, though a primal instinct urged me to flee. I turned to the back of the train, intent on finding the source of the disturbance, but the aisle felt endless, stretching like a dark tunnel before me. Just then, a soft humming broke the silence, a lullaby that sent shivers down my spine. It resonated from the depths of the train, luring me closer with its haunting melody. I hesitated, torn between the instinct to escape and an inexplicable curiosity. I took a deep breath and began to walk, each step echoing in the quiet. As I moved further down the aisle, the humming grew louder, wrapping around me like a fog. I glanced back. The other passengers seemed frozen in place, eyes wide with fear. I felt like a moth drawn to a flame, unable to resist the call. At the end of the carriage, I found a door partially ajar, revealing a dimly lit compartment. The melody poured from within, beckoning me closer. I pushed the door open, heart pounding, and stepped inside. The compartment was filled with strange objects, old photographs, dusty books, and what looked like antique dolls, their glassy eyes staring blankly. In the center of the room stood a tall figure draped in shadow, humming softly. "Welcome," the figure said, voice smooth and melodic, yet chilling. "You've come to join us." I took a step back, heart racing. "Join you? What do you mean?" The figure stepped into the light, revealing a woman with an ethereal beauty, her eyes dark pools that seemed to pull me in. "We are all travelers here, lost between worlds. The train is a bridge, and you have crossed it." "Lost?" I echoed, panic rising in my chest. "I want to go back." She smiled, a chillingly serene expression. "There is no going back. Not anymore." I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the room. The dolls seemed to watch me, their smiles unnaturally wide. I pressed against the door, desperate to escape, but it wouldn't budge. "Please, let me out," I cried, my voice trembling. The woman's expression shifted, her eyes narrowing. "You must understand the truth. You cannot escape what you do not see." I felt a sudden rush of wind, a sensation that sent the room spinning. The walls of the compartment seemed to pulse, warping and twisting. I staggered, struggling to maintain my balance as the room transformed around me. In an instant, I was no longer in the compartment. I found myself standing in a vast, dark void, the train car gone. I looked around, disoriented and terrified. Shadows flitted at the edges of my vision, whispers echoing all around me. I was utterly alone. "Where am I?" I shouted, my voice swallowed by the darkness. "You're between worlds," came a reply, echoing in the void. "The place where fears take shape." I turned, seeking the source of the voice, but saw only shadows shifting in the corners of my sight. "What do you want from me?" "Only to show you the truth," the voice whispered, growing louder. "To reveal what lies beneath the surface." Suddenly, the shadows lunged at me, coiling around my body like tendrils of smoke. I struggled against them, gasping for breath, but they tightened their grip, squeezing the air from my lungs. In that moment of desperation, I recalled the faces of the other passengers, their lifeless expressions. I had to fight, not just for myself, but for them as well. Gathering every ounce of strength, I focused on the memory of my own reflection, the flicker of life in my eyes. "No!" I screamed, summoning the power of my will. I refused to be a part of this. With a surge of defiance, I broke free from the shadows, gasping as I stumbled back into the train compartment. The woman stood before me, eyes wide with surprise. "Why did you resist?" she asked, a hint of curiosity in her voice. "Because I am not lost," I shouted, bolstered by the revelation that I still held power over my own fate. The lights flickered back to life, illuminating the room. The dolls remained still, their expressions frozen in eerie delight. I rushed for the door, my heart racing, determined to escape. But just as I reached for the handle, a sudden weight pressed down on my chest. I turned, the woman's gaze piercing through me. "You may leave, but the darkness will follow." As I flung open the door and stepped back into the train, I could feel the shadows lurking behind me, waiting for my moment of weakness. But I had escaped for now. With each step away from that compartment, I could hear the whispers growing louder, an ominous reminder that this journey was far from over. I had to find a way to confront the darkness lurking within and around me, or risk becoming one of the lost souls that haunted this mysterious train. I stumbled back into the dimly lit carriage, my heart racing as I tried to regain my composure. The other passengers still sat frozen, their eyes reflecting a mix of fear and confusion. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to look around and assess my surroundings. The train was still moving, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels barely masking the whispers that danced through the air. Desperate for answers, I glanced at the man who had sat beside me earlier. He seemed more alive now, his eyes darting nervously. "Did you see her?" I asked, urgency creeping into my voice. He nodded slowly, his face pale. "The one in the compartment? She's a siren of sorts. A lure for lost souls." I swallowed hard. "What does she want?" "To keep us here," he replied, glancing toward the door I had just fled. "Those who cross over rarely return." You must find a way to break the spell. Spell? I echoed, the weight of his words sinking in. How do I do that? He shook his head, fear etched on his features. I don't know. But you mustn't give in to the darkness. It feeds on despair. As his words settled, the whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a storm. I gripped the seat to steady myself, my mind racing. I had faced the shadows, but I could still feel their presence lurking just beyond my sight. The air felt charged with an impending sense of doom, and I knew time was running out. Suddenly, the train jolted violently, throwing me off balance. I stumbled back into the aisle, clutching the seat backs for support. The lights flickered ominously, casting erratic shadows that danced menacingly along the walls. I heard gasps from the passengers, their fear palpable as the train seemed to plunge into darkness. "Stay close," I shouted, scanning the carriage for anyone willing to follow. The man beside me stood, determination sparking in his eyes. "Let's find a way out," he said, and together we moved toward the front of the train, where the conductor's cabin might offer answers or at least a means of escape. As we approached the door leading to the next carriage, I hesitated, remembering the figure I had seen earlier. What if the woman is waiting for us? He met my gaze, a steely resolve settling in. We can't let fear control us. We have to try. I nodded, though doubt gnawed at me. I pushed the door open, and the darkness spilled into the carriage, thick and heavy. We stepped through, and the atmosphere shifted, the air growing colder. The next carriage was even emptier than the last, and the sound of the wheels began to fade into an eerie silence. We moved cautiously, scanning the seats for any signs of life. Shadows flitted at the edges of our vision, whispering secrets we couldn't quite grasp. At the end of the carriage, I spotted another door leading to what seemed like the engine room. I pointed it out, and we hurried toward it, adrenaline fueling our every step. As we reached the door, the whispers intensified, swirling around us like a gale. The air vibrated with a sense of foreboding, and I felt a chill creep up my spine. "This must be it," I said, pushing the door open. Inside, the room was cramped and cluttered with old machinery. The engine throbbed with life, but the space felt eerily empty. In the corner stood a large window, through which I could see the night racing by, the world outside swallowed by darkness. "Is anyone here?" I called, my voice echoing against the metal walls. Silence met my question, and I felt a sudden weight of despair wash over me. "Maybe we're too late," I murmured, my hope flickering like the overhead lights. The man stepped forward, examining the controls. "We need to stop this train," he said, a determined glint in his eyes. "If we can get the engine to stop, maybe we can break the cycle." I nodded, my heart racing as I approached the controls. "How do we do that?" He pointed at a lever labeled emergency stop. "Pull that, and it might give us a chance." I reached for the lever, my fingers trembling. The whispers grew louder, almost angry, swirling around us as I gripped the cold metal. I could feel their energy and insatiable hunger threatening to engulf me. "Do it," the man urged, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. With a surge of resolve, I yanked the lever down. The train lurched violently, metal grinding against metal. I stumbled back, the force of the movement nearly throwing me off my feet. The engine roared, the vibrations rattling my bones, and then silence. The train screeched to a halt, throwing us both forward. I caught myself against the wall, gasping for breath. Did we do it? I panted, my heart pounding in my chest. The man looked around, eyes wide with disbelief. I think so. But as the stillness settled, I felt a wave of dread wash over me. The darkness outside pressed closer, and I knew the shadows were not far behind. The whispers faded, replaced by a low, ominous hum that seemed to reverberate through the train. Suddenly, the door behind us burst open. The woman stood there, her ethereal form framed by the darkness, a malevolent smile on her lips. "You think you can escape?" she taunted, stepping forward with an air of confidence. The man and I exchanged a panicked glance, and I felt a cold knot of fear twist in my stomach. "We have to face her," I said, voice steadying despite my fear. "It's the only way." I stepped forward, heart racing, ready to confront the darkness that had ensnared us. The shadows swirled around her, drawing closer, and I could feel their icy breath on my skin. "What do you want from us?" I demanded, forcing my voice to remain steady. Her smile widened, revealing teeth that glinted in the dim light. "Only to show you the truth of this place. You are here because you belong here." "No," I countered, summoning every ounce of courage. "We belong to the light, not the shadows." With that declaration, I felt a surge of energy, a warmth rising within me as I faced the darkness. I reached for the memories of my life, laughter, joy, the faces of loved ones. "We are not lost," I shouted, the words echoing with newfound strength. The shadows recoiled, writhing and hissing as I stood firm against the encroaching darkness. The woman's expression shifted, confusion mingling with anger. "You will not take us," I cried, my voice resonating through the cabin. In that moment, the shadows surged, enveloping her in a dark whirlwind. I felt the pull of the darkness, but I resisted, focusing on the light that I carried within. The woman's form began to fade, her laughter replaced by furious screams. "You cannot escape your fate," she howled as the darkness consumed her. With a final surge of defiance, I pushed against the shadows, feeling their grip loosen as the train rattled again. The whispers began to dissipate, replaced by a sudden rush of clarity. As the darkness withdrew, I turned to the man beside me, breathless. "Did we win?" He looked around, eyes wide with wonder. "I think so." Together, we stepped outside the engine room, emerging back into the main carriage. The other passengers were beginning to stir, blinking in confusion as if awakening from a dream. I felt a glimmer of hope, but I knew we weren't safe yet. The darkness might have retreated for now, but I could sense it lurking just beyond the edges of reality. We had to find a way to keep it at bay, to reclaim our lives from the abyss. With determination set in our hearts, we made our way toward the front of the train, ready to face whatever lay ahead. We had fought for our lives, but the true battle was far from over. Together, we would unravel the mystery of this train and discover the truth of our own existence. The train car felt different now. The oppressive atmosphere that had once engulfed us began to lift, replaced by a lingering tension that hinted at the danger still present. I glanced around, noticing the once dazed passengers slowly regaining their composure, exchanging anxious glances. Some whispered to one another, while others clung to their seats, visibly shaken. "We have to stay together," I urged the man beside me, the only one I felt a connection to in this sea of lost souls. "If we're going to find a way off this train, we need to support each other." He nodded, determination hardening his features. "Let's gather everyone. They need to know what we're up against." We moved through the carriage, rallying the passengers who were still recovering from the shock. "Listen," I called out, my voice steady but urgent. "We've just escaped something terrible. There's a darkness here that wants to keep us trapped. We need to work together to find a way out." Murmurs of fear and disbelief rippled through the group, but a few brave souls stepped forward, emboldened by our words. Together, we formed a small group, ready to confront the unknown. "Does anyone know where the conductor is?" I asked, searching the faces around me. "He might have a way to stop this train for good." A woman with short, dark hair nodded. "I saw him at the front of the train before everything went dark. We need to get there." "Then let's move," I said, leading the way through the carriages, my heart pounding in my chest. As we traversed the narrow aisles, the weight of the shadows seemed to grow heavier, pressing against us as if they were trying to infiltrate our resolve. I could feel the whispers creeping back into my mind, weaving a web of doubt. What if we were too late? What if the darkness was stronger than we anticipated? "No," I thought fiercely, shaking my head. "We can't let it win. We're not lost. We are here, and we will fight." We finally reached the next carriage, where the faint sound of machinery echoed. I pushed the door open, and we all piled in, finding ourselves in what appeared to be the control room of the train. The walls were lined with dials, levers, and blinking lights, but the room was empty. "Where is he?" someone whispered, glancing around nervously. Suddenly, the hum of energy intensified, and a chilling breeze swept through the room. I could sense the shadows closing in, ready to strike. "We need to find the conductor," I shouted, panic beginning to claw at my chest. Just then, the door behind us slammed shut, and we turned to see the woman standing there once again, her figure illuminated by the flickering lights. The darkness coiled around her like a living cloak, and I felt the air grow colder. "You think you can escape?" she taunted, her voice dripping with malice. "This train is my domain. You are all mine. We are not yours," I retorted, stepping forward, fueled by the energy of the group behind me. "You don't control us anymore." She laughed, a sound that sent chills racing down my spine. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, child. The darkness will always find a way." With a wave of her hand, shadows erupted from the walls, surging toward us. "Stay close," I shouted as the group huddled together, drawing strength from one another. As the shadows reached for us, I remembered the warmth I had felt before, my memories, my light. "Focus on what matters," I urged the group, feeling the energy pulse between us. "Think of your loved ones, your hopes. Use that light." The passengers closed their eyes, and I felt a flicker of warmth spreading through the group. I concentrated, summoning the light within me, feeling it swell as I thought of the connections we had formed and the strength we drew from one another. The shadows hesitated, swirling around us like smoke. "You cannot fight me with mere memories," the woman shouted, anger lacing her voice. "Watch us," I yelled, raising my arms as the warmth turned into a radiant glow, illuminating the dark room. The light pushed against the shadows, causing them to recoil. "Together," I cried, urging everyone to join me. "We can break this." In unison, we raised our hands, channeling our collective strength. A brilliant light erupted from our circle, driving back the shadows as they writhed and shrieked, the sound echoing like a chorus of despair. "And oh," the woman screamed, her form flickering as the light grew brighter. "You cannot do this." But we could. The energy surged, wrapping around her like a cocoon. She clawed at the air, but the light engulfed her, banishing the darkness that had once held us captive. With one final burst of power, the shadows shattered, dissipating into wisps of smoke. The woman's expression twisted into one of fury and disbelief as she faded into the light. The room fell silent, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The air felt lighter, as if the weight of the darkness had finally been lifted. "We did it," someone exclaimed, joy bubbling through the group. But as I caught my breath, a sense of urgency rushed over me. "We still need to stop this train. The conductor may have a way to ensure we're truly free." With renewed determination, we turned toward the door leading to the next compartment. As we stepped out, I could see the passengers beginning to awaken, their faces reflecting hope and confusion. "There's a chance to go back," I said, urging everyone forward. "We just have to keep moving." We pressed on through the train, moving toward the front. The atmosphere was different now, lighter, almost serene, but I could feel the remnants of darkness lingering, waiting for an opportunity to creep back in. Finally, we reached the last door, leading to the conductor's cabin. I hesitated for a moment before pushing it open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with various levers and dials. To my surprise, the conductor was there, sitting at the control panel, his eyes wide with shock. "What happened?" he asked, his voice shaky. "You shouldn't be here." "We need to stop the train," I said urgently. "There's a darkness on board, and we need to break free." He looked around, uncertainty flashing in his eyes. "But the train can't just stop. It's bound by the tracks, tied to this realm." "Then we have to find another way," I insisted. "Can't you redirect it? We need to escape before it's too late." He nodded slowly, realizing the gravity of our situation. "All right. But you must help me. We need to work together." As he began to manipulate the controls, I gathered the others. "Everyone, we need to channel our energy again. We have to push the darkness out for good." We formed a circle around the control panel, closing our eyes and reaching out toward one another. I could feel the warmth and light blooming between us once more. "Now!" I shouted, and we concentrated on the warmth within, directing it toward the conductor. With each heartbeat, the light grew brighter, illuminating the room until it felt as if we were standing in a sunbeam. The energy surged through the conductor, flowing into the controls. He adjusted the levers, his hands steady as the train began to rumble. "I think it's working," he called out, glancing up at us with hope. But just as the lights flickered to life, the darkness surged again, more ferocious than before. Shadows crawled along the walls, reaching for us with sinister intent. "Hold on!" I shouted, feeling the pressure build as we fought against the encroaching void. The shadows swirled, dark tendrils clawing our resolve. "You cannot escape," a voice echoed through the room, a chilling reminder of the woman's presence. "Keep pushing," I urged, determination surging through me. "We're stronger together." We focused on the light, forcing it to expand, feeling the warmth surge through our hands and into the cabin. In that moment, we were united in purpose. I felt the shadows thrashing against the light, but we held firm, drawing on our memories, our hopes, and our unity. The train began to shudder violently, the wheels screeching against the tracks as the shadows writhed and shrieked, desperately trying to cling to us. But we wouldn't let them win. With a final, collective effort, we unleashed the light, pushing back against the darkness with all our might. The cabin erupted in a blinding brilliance, and I felt the shadows dissipate like smoke in the wind. As the darkness shattered, the conductor quickly adjusted the final lever, and with a jolt, the train lurched to a stop. Silence fell over us as the light dimmed, revealing the conductor's shocked expression and the relieved faces of the passengers. Did we win?" someone asked, a hint of disbelief in their voice. I took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the light fade but knowing it still resided within us. Yes, but we have to keep moving. We can't linger here. We need to find the exit. We exited the cabin, stepping into the fresh air of the night. The darkness had been banished, but the remnants of its presence lingered like a distant echo. "Where do we go from here?" the man beside me asked, scanning the horizon. I glanced around, spotting a glimmer of light in the distance, an outline of a station emerging from the shadows. "There. We'll head there." As we walked toward the light, I felt a sense of hope blooming within me. We had faced the darkness together, and we had emerged victorious. But the journey wasn't over. I knew that the shadows would always exist, lurking just beyond the edges of reality, waiting for another chance to ensnare the lost. Together, we would carry the light within us, a beacon against the darkness, reminding us that even in the most terrifying of circumstances, hope could prevail. Voices in the abandoned house. Have you ever walked into a place that felt alive with echoes of the past, where every creak of the floorboards seemed to whisper forgotten secrets? My friends and I certainly had no idea what we were about to uncover when we ventured into the abandoned house at the edge of town, a place shrouded in mystery and rumors of the supernatural. I remember that chilly evening when we arrived. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the overgrown yard. The house stood there, a dilapidated structure with peeling paint and broken windows, exuding a sense of forlorn nostalgia. Local legends said it had been vacant for over a decade, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still residing within those walls. My heart raced as we stepped onto the creaking porch. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah, my closest friend, asked, her voice trembling slightly. I glanced back at her, trying to mask my own trepidation with a brave smile. "Come on, it will be an adventure. Plus, there's bound to be a story in there waiting to be told." With my other friends, Jake and Mia, joining us, we pushed the door open. It groaned as if protesting our intrusion, and I couldn't help but feel we were trespassing into a realm that had been sealed off for too long. The air inside was thick with dust and the scent of decay. It felt heavy, almost tangible, as if the house was holding its breath, waiting for us to disturb its slumber. The first few minutes were filled with laughter and light-hearted banter as we explored the ground floor. Old furniture lay strewn about, covered in layers of dust, remnants of a life long forgotten. A grand piano sat in the corner, its keys yellowed and silent. I couldn't resist sitting down and pressing a few keys. The sound echoed through the emptiness, a haunting melody that seemed to stir the very essence of the house. But as we climbed the staircase to the second floor, the atmosphere shifted. The laughter faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. My skin prickled with an instinctual awareness, as if we were being watched. I exchanged nervous glances with Sarah, who was now clinging to Jake's arm. "Do you hear that?" Mia whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. At first, I dismissed it as the wind, but then I heard it, a faint murmuring, like distant voices floating through the air. My heart raced. "It's probably just the wind," I said, but even I wasn't convinced. We pressed on, drawn to the source of the whispers. The hallway stretched out before us, dimly lit by the weak light filtering through the broken windows. As we walked, the voices grew louder, clearer. They sounded like a conversation, urgent and distressed, yet I couldn't make out the words. Suddenly, a door creaked open at the end of the hall. The four of us froze. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it just the wind, or had someone, something, pushed it open? Maybe we should go back, Jake suggested, his voice shaking. But curiosity propelled me forward. Let's just take a peek, I urged, leading the way toward the door. With each step, the air thickened, and the voices became almost deafening, filling my head with a cacophony of whispers. I reached for the door handle, my hand trembling. When I opened it, the room beyond was empty, save for a dusty old mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. The reflection showed us, but something else flickered in the corner, something dark and fleeting. I blinked, and it was gone, leaving me questioning my sanity. As I stepped into the room, the whispers ceased, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. What just happened? Sarah asked, glancing nervously around the empty space. Did anyone else see that? See what? Jake replied, eyeing the mirror with suspicion. I didn't see anything. But I could tell he was lying. His face was pale, and his eyes darted around, searching for an escape. Suddenly, a chill swept through the room. The temperature dropped, and I felt a cold breath against my neck. I turned around quickly, but no one was there. Let's get out of here, I said, panic rising in my chest. Just as I made to leave, a loud crash echoed from downstairs, sending us all into a frenzy. What was that? Mia screamed, her eyes wide with fear. Without a second thought, we dashed back down the stairs, hearts pounding in unison. The living room was a mess. A bookshelf had toppled over, its contents scattered across the floor. My mind raced as I tried to piece together what could have caused it. Maybe it was the wind, Jake suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. We huddled together, fear gripping us tightly. The voices were back, whispering urgently, as if warning us. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone in this house, that something wanted us to leave. Let's go outside, Sarah finally said, her voice barely a whisper. We all nodded, and together, we retraced our steps back toward the door. But as we reached for the handle, it wouldn't budge. Panic set in, and I pulled harder, but it felt as if the house itself was holding us captive. Suddenly, the whispers intensified, turning into frantic shouts that echoed in my ears. I pressed my hands to my temples, overwhelmed by the cacophony. Make it stop! I screamed, but the voices only grew louder, drowning out my thoughts. Try the windows! Mia shouted, rushing toward the nearest one. We all scrambled to open them, but they were stuck, sealed shut by years of neglect. The fear turned to desperation as we clawed at the frames, trying to escape the confines of this haunted house. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, the noise fell silent. A deafening stillness enveloped us, leaving only the sound of our ragged breaths. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. What just happened? I asked, my voice shaking. And then, I heard it, a single voice, clear and close. Help us, it begged, a sound so sorrowful that it sent shivers down my spine. It was a plea from the beyond, a call for assistance that stirred something deep within me. We have to help them, I said, my resolve hardening despite my fear. There's something trapped here. As we stood there, I could see the flicker of hope in my friend's eyes. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by a shared determination. We had to uncover the truth behind the voices and the dark history of this house. As we stood frozen in the chilling silence, the weight of the house pressed down on us like a thick fog. The air felt charged, almost electric, as if we were on the verge of discovering something monumental. The voice, the same haunting whisper we had heard before, echoed in my mind. Help us, it lingered, wrapping around my thoughts, pulling me closer to whatever lay hidden in this forsaken place. Okay, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We need to find out where it's coming from. My friends looked at me, uncertainty flickering in their eyes, but I could sense a shared resolve. We had come this far, backing down now wasn't an option. Let's split up, Jake suggested, his tone more assertive than before. We can cover more ground that way. I hesitated, the idea of separating in such an eerie environment sending chills down my spine. But deep down, I knew it was the only way we'd get answers. Fine, but let's keep in touch, I replied, trying to mask the fear creeping into my voice. If anyone hears anything strange, we regroup immediately. We all nodded, albeit reluctantly, and ventured deeper into the house. I made my way back upstairs, the wooden steps creaking under my weight. The house felt like it was breathing, shifting as I moved through its halls. Each room I entered was filled with remnants of a life long gone, old photographs, tattered furniture, and curtains that fluttered like ghosts in the draft. But there was a sense of sorrow that hung in the air, a feeling that I was intruding on something sacred. As I entered a bedroom, I noticed the mirror again, still hanging at an odd angle. I approached it, drawn in by its dark, reflective surface. My heart pounded as I gazed into it, half expecting to see something, or someone, behind me. But the room remained empty, the shadows dancing just out of my line of sight. Then, the whisper came again, softer this time. "Help us." I glanced around, the urge to run overwhelming. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice trembling. "What do you want?" There was no answer, just the echo of my own words bouncing off the walls. Suddenly, the mirror flickered, and for a split second, I saw images flash across its surface, a woman with sorrowful eyes, a child clutching a toy, a man with a weary expression. They looked trapped, their faces twisted in desperation. I stumbled back, my heart racing. Were these the voices calling for help? I turned to leave the room, but as I did, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. Panic surged through me. "Let me out!" I shouted, banging on the door, but it held fast. The air around me thickened, and I could feel the temperature dropping. I pressed my back against the wall, searching for an escape. "Please, help us." The voice resonated deep within me, striking a chord of empathy that I couldn't ignore. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. "What do you need?" I asked, my voice quieter now, almost pleading. The temperature dropped further, and I could see my breath in the air. I concentrated, listening intently for any sign of a response. "Find the truth," came the voice, clearer this time. "You must uncover what happened." With newfound determination, I banged on the door again, shouting for my friends. "Help! I'm stuck." Finally, the door creaked open, and Sarah stood there, her face pale with fear. "What happened?" "We heard the banging." "I don't know," I replied, stepping out of the room and into the hallway. "But I heard something. They need our help." Jake and Mia rushed over, their eyes wide with concern. "Did you find anything?" Jake asked, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "It's getting darker in here." "Yeah, I saw something." "I think there are spirits trapped here," I explained, my voice trembling. "They want us to uncover their truth." Sarah looked skeptical, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "What kind of truth?" "I don't know yet, but we need to find clues. There has to be something in this house that can tell us what happened," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. With renewed urgency, We set off to search the remaining rooms, each of us holding on to the hope that we could somehow help the lost souls that lingered within the walls. As we moved deeper into the house, the atmosphere thickened, a palpable tension hanging in the air. In one of the back rooms, we found a dusty old trunk hidden beneath a pile of debris. My heart raced as I pried it open, the rusted hinges creaking in protest. Inside, we discovered a collection of letters, their edges frayed with age. "Look at this," Mia exclaimed, pulling out a few of the letters and flipping through them. "They're addressed to someone named Elizabeth." "Elizabeth," I echoed, feeling a flicker of recognition. "That's the name of the woman I saw in the mirror." We huddled together, reading the letters aloud. They detailed a family's struggles, loss, sorrow, and an overwhelming sense of despair. As we delved deeper into the contents, a chilling realization washed over me. This family had suffered greatly, and their voices were still echoing in this house, seeking closure. The last letter was the most disturbing. It spoke of a tragedy, a fire that had consumed their home, taking the lives of the parents and leaving Elizabeth and her younger brother trapped inside. "They never got out," I whispered, a wave of sorrow washing over me. "They're still here, searching for a way to be free." Suddenly, the room felt colder, and a gust of wind rushed through, extinguishing the dim light of our flashlights. Darkness enveloped us, and the whispers returned, louder and more frantic. "Help us! Help us!" My heart raced as I struggled to keep my composure. "What do we do?" Sarah cried out, her voice tinged with panic. "Maybe if we can find a way to honor their memory, we can help them move on," I suggested, trying to think clearly amidst the chaos. "We need to give them closure." Just then, the trunk rattled violently, causing us to jump back. I could feel a presence, something dark and angry rising around us. "They don't want us here," Jake shouted, backing away toward the door. "No, we can't leave now," I pleaded, desperation creeping into my voice. "We're so close." But the whispers turned into wails, filling the room with anguish. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me as I realized the spirits were growing restless. "Quick, let's gather the letters and anything we can find that belonged to them," I shouted, urgency rising within me. As we scrambled to collect the items, the atmosphere grew more oppressive. I could hear the sound of footsteps behind us, yet when I turned, there was nothing but darkness. A deep sense of foreboding crept in, and I could feel the weight of despair wrapping around me like a shroud. "Please, just give us a sign," I yelled, frustration bubbling over. "We want to help you." Suddenly, a brilliant flash of light illuminated the room, and for a brief moment, I saw the silhouettes of the family standing before us, their faces twisted in agony. "Help us, release us," they pleaded, their voices merging into a haunting chorus. In that moment, I understood. They needed recognition, acknowledgement of their pain. "We will tell your story," I cried out, my voice ringing with conviction. "We won't forget you." The light flickered, and the spirits began to dissipate, their anguished faces softening as if they felt a weight lifting. "Thank you," echoed through the air, mingling with the sound of the wind outside. As the darkness retreated, a sense of calm washed over us. I looked at my friends, their eyes wide with disbelief. "Did we just—" Jake trailed off, searching for the right words. "I think we did," I replied, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "We helped them find peace." But as we gathered our things to leave, a chilling realization struck me. While we may have helped the spirits of that family move on, the house would forever hold its secrets. It was a place where the past lingered, whispering its stories to anyone brave enough to listen. We stepped out into the cool night air, the weight of our experience heavy upon us. The house loomed behind us, a silhouette against the starlit sky, and I knew it would haunt my dreams for years to come. As we drove away, the whispers faded into the distance, leaving me with a sense of both closure and dread. I would always remember that night, the night we confronted the echoes of the past and, in doing so, uncovered our own fears. As we drove away, the weight of the night settled heavily on my chest. The car's headlights pierced through the darkness, illuminating the winding road ahead, but my mind was still trapped within the haunted walls of that house. Did you feel that? Mia broke the silence, her voice trembling slightly. It was like they were really there. Yeah, I replied, gripping the steering wheel tightly. It felt so real. I can't shake the feeling that they were trying to tell us something. Jake turned in his seat, his brow furrowed. Do you think we actually helped them? Or do we just make things worse? I'd like to think we helped, I said, though doubt crept in. But I can't help but wonder if we should have done more. As we drove further away, the night wrapped around us like a thick fog, and I felt a lingering chill that had nothing to do with the cool air. The landscape outside was familiar yet alien, as if the night had transformed our surroundings into something surreal. The next morning, I awoke with a sense of dread still lingering in my bones. I had trouble shaking the feeling that our encounter with the spirits hadn't truly ended. I had a nagging thought that the house might still have some hold on us, especially after the intensity of the night before. I can't stop thinking about Elizabeth and her family, I told Sarah as we sipped coffee at the kitchen table. What if there's more to their story? What if there are other families like them? Sarah nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Maybe we should go back, she suggested. If there's more to uncover, we owe it to them to find out. What if we uncover something even darker? Jake chimed in, his voice laced with concern. Last night was intense enough. I get it, but think about it, I insisted. What if we can give them the closure they need? We could find more letters or anything that tells their story. After a tense discussion, we decided to return to the house. We prepared ourselves mentally for what we might face, knowing that the darkness might still be waiting for us. When we arrived, the house stood silent and still, its broken windows resembling hollow eyes staring out into the world. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that danced ominously across the ground. This feels different, Mia whispered, her voice barely above a murmur. Yeah, I feel it too, I replied, a shiver running down my spine. As we stepped inside, the air felt heavier than before, thick with an unsettling energy. The memories of our last encounter flooded back, making me acutely aware of every creak and whisper in the old structure. Let's head back to the room with the trunk, I suggested, trying to maintain a sense of purpose. We made our way upstairs, the floorboards groaning under our weight. Once in the bedroom, I felt a sense of foreboding wash over me. If we can find more of their belongings, it might help us understand what happened, I said, though uncertainty gnawed at my insides. We searched the room meticulously, overturning furniture and peering into every dark corner. The atmosphere felt charged, as if the house was alive and watching our every move. Suddenly, Mia gasped. Look, she exclaimed, pointing to a small box hidden beneath the bed. I hurried over, my heart racing with anticipation. We pulled the box out, its surface covered in dust. As I opened it, the scent of mildew wafted up, but inside lay more letters, old photographs, and a tattered diary. Wow, this must belong to Elizabeth, Sarah said, her voice filled with awe. "We have to read this." We gathered around as I carefully unfolded the diary, the pages fragile and yellowed with age. Elizabeth's handwriting flowed elegantly across the pages, revealing glimpses of her life, a world filled with both joy and sorrow. The entries started with tales of laughter and family gatherings, but as the days progressed, the tone shifted. The entries grew darker, reflecting a growing sense of dread. "There's something wrong in our house," one entry read. "I hear whispers at night, and sometimes I see shadows moving in the corners of my room." This is exactly what we felt, Jake exclaimed, his voice rising with urgency. She was experiencing the same things we are. As we read on, we learned about the family's struggles, the father's declining health, the mother's increasing anxiety, and Elizabeth's desperate attempts to protect her younger brother. The final entry sent chills down my spine. "I fear for my family. Something terrible is coming. If anyone finds this, please remember us." The last line was scrawled hastily, as if written in a panic. What could have happened to them? I wondered aloud, a sense of dread curling in my stomach. Just then, the temperature in the room dropped, and the whispers returned, louder than ever. "Help us, release us." "Not again," Sarah murmured, her face pale. "We need to get out of here," Jake shouted, his voice tinged with panic. "No, wait," I insisted. "We can't leave yet. They're trying to tell us something." But as I spoke, the room grew darker, shadows stretching across the walls like fingers reaching out. I could feel the presence of the spirits intensifying, their desperation palpable. "Please, we want to help you," I yelled, fighting against the rising fear. Suddenly, the diary flew out of my hands, landing open on the floor. The pages fluttered violently, stopping at an entry that glowed with an eerie light. "What is happening?" Mia cried, stepping back in fear. I approached the diary, feeling a pull towards it. The words seemed to shimmer, revealing a new message: "Find the hidden room. It holds the key to our freedom." A sense of clarity washed over me. "We have to find this hidden room," I declared, determination filling my voice. "It's our only chance to help them." But just as I spoke, the air around us thickened, and a force pushed against us, almost as if the house itself was trying to keep us inside. "Stay. You cannot leave." The whispers turned into shouts, a cacophony of voices filled with anguish and rage. With a surge of adrenaline, I grabbed Sarah and Jake's hands, pulling them towards the door. "We need to find it. Now!" As we burst into the hallway, the shadows seemed to writhe around us, creating a maze of darkness. I had no idea where this hidden room could be, but something deep inside me guided my steps, pushing me further into the depths of the house. We rushed down the stairs, the whispers growing louder, more frantic. "Help us! Help us! Over here!" Mia shouted, pointing to a door at the end of the hall. It was partially ajar, and an unnatural light flickered from within. As we approached, I felt a mix of fear and excitement. "This has to be it," I whispered. I pushed the door open, and what lay beyond took my breath away. The room was small and cramped, cluttered with old furniture and dusty belongings. But in the center, a glowing orb floated above an ancient-looking chest. "What is that?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, but it feels powerful," I replied, stepping closer. As I reached out to touch the chest, a jolt of energy surged through me. The whispers grew deafening, surrounding us in a whirlwind of voices. "Release us. Free us. Okay, okay, I shouted, trying to calm the chaos. We will help you. With trembling hands, I opened the chest, revealing a collection of trinkets, mementos, and a small, intricately carved key. This must be the key to their freedom, I realized, holding it up for my friends to see. As I grasped the key, a calmness washed over the room, and the whispers transformed into a chorus of gratitude. Thank you, thank you. Suddenly, the glowing orb began to pulse, casting a warm light that enveloped us. The shadows receded, revealing the room in its true form, dusty but filled with a serene energy. Are we really helping them? Sarah asked, her eyes wide with wonder. Yes, I breathed, feeling a connection to the spirits growing stronger. We're giving them a chance to find peace. With the key in hand, we returned to the bedroom, the atmosphere now filled with a sense of purpose. What do we do with it? Jake asked, glancing at the locked trunk we had found earlier. I stepped forward, heart racing with anticipation. We need to unlock their past. As I inserted the key into the lock, the trunk creaked open, revealing a hidden compartment filled with old photographs and documents detailing the family's life. Each item told a story, revealing their joys and sorrows, their hopes and fears. Look at this, Mia exclaimed, holding up a photograph of Elizabeth and her brother, both smiling brightly. They were so happy once. Tears welled in my eyes as I realized the weight of what we had uncovered. We need to share their story, honor their memory, I said, my voice thick with emotion. The whispers returned, but this time they felt different, softer, more peaceful. Thank you, thank you. We stood in silence, each of us absorbing the magnitude of the moment. We had not only uncovered a hidden part of history, but had also connected with the souls trapped within the walls of the house. As we made our way back down the stairs, a sense of closure enveloped us. We had given a voice to the voiceless, and for the first time, I felt the weight of the house lifting. This place is finally free, I said, glancing back at the structure that had held so much pain. As we drove away, the sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the landscape. The spirits had found peace, and so had we. And in that moment, I realized the power of connection, how understanding the past can heal the wounds of the present, and how sometimes it takes courage to confront the darkness to find the light. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.